Okay guys, ready to get started. Just going to have a coffee before we start. We're happy to hold off for 20 minutes or so. Alright, no worries. We'll get stuck straight into it. I'm just going to kill the lights so you can see what's going on that screen. Absolutely. Guys, I'll just pass around this giant bag of pens as well. If you want to reach in there and grab one. So who's here for the first time today? Well, good. So bathrooms are just through that second exit just there. So if you're looking for them, feel free to head off at any stage. We're just going to spend about 20 minutes on the couch to start with. So maybe after that we'll take a quick rest break before we start doing tasting and a little bit of coffee stuff. As you're walking over that way, just watch out for that step. That runs all the way across. Don't trip over that. Pretty easy to miss. So I'll tell you a little bit about today's class and what we'll be doing. So we're going to start with a really quick just theory session on coffee. Really basic stuff like where does coffee come from, what gives it quality as well. So we just want to get to the bottom of that and give it a little bit of context to some of the tasting that we're going to be doing today. So once we've had that theory session, we're going to jump on and do a whole heap of different palate tests. So one of them is the sweet, salt and sour test. Has anyone ever done that test before or heard it? Pretty new. So this is just the way that we train people to taste, essentially. And we're going to team that up and do an organic acid test alongside. So pretty much tasting a lot of the core components that we need to analyse with coffee quality. Once we've done that and everyone's kind of warmed up, we've had a really good idea of how our palates are working, how we perceive different things, we'll move on to the Linez de Café kits, which are essentially aroma vials that have a big representation of the common aromas found in coffee. So we'll spend some time working on that today. And all this is gearing us up for actually tasting and comparing a whole bunch of coffees from different origins with different processing as well. And I hope that's kind of what people take out of a session like this. They walk away with a little bit of coffee knowledge, the ability to taste, and then the ability to critically compare different coffees and just assess objectively what is the difference between them, as well as being able to say, I like this better than that one. We want to have some level of objectivity to it today. So the sheet I've given you is the tool we're going to use to try and do that. Has anyone seen this sheet before? No? Alright. Cool. Has anyone been to a cupping before? Traditional cupping of coffee? You guys?
Serious one.
Not a serious one? So today won't be too serious either. But you have been to a cupping, some sort of tasting. What was your experience?
In what sense?
As in, did you go to a cupping with a
No, we just did it like 60 days ago.
Ah, okay.
We just tried.
Cool. What we'll do today is go through the whole procedure, like how we set up a cupping, how you actually, what the specific parameters are. We need to be able to do it correctly, and I'll show you guys how to taste, how to evaluate, and we'll do so using these forms. And essentially these forms have been designed for a whole bunch of people with different palates, different ways of tasting to get together and give some sort of critical and objective analysis of coffee quality. So that's going to be the purpose of those today. But just to start with, what we'll do is talk through a whole bunch of theory stuff. So I guess for us as a roastery, this is kind of how we think about coffee. Like, there's a whole supply chain to it, and most of us just working in cafes really just see that last part where we're preparing a product that essentially has been through a whole heap of different processes that affect the quality of it and the price of it as well. So we're going to explore some of that stuff here, and I guess this is the first concept to explore, that coffee is essentially a fruit. It's an organic product, and that's how we should treat it in a cafe as well. It's something that keeps changing, something that has a shelf life. You guys might already know this, but there's commercially two very common strains of the coffee plant that we find. There's Arabica and there's Robusta. Are you guys pretty familiar with that? Heard those two? Which is the better quality one? Arabica, yeah. And for specialty coffee, this is what we find. Most specialty coffee roasters won't be putting Robusta in their blends at all. And the reason for that is really just the difference in quality. We'll kind of get into a little bit of depth on some of those terms. Have you heard that term, like specialty coffee? Or what about commodity grade coffee? You know what that is? Alright, beautiful. So by the time you leave here today, you'll be able to say what the difference between those is, and that's a pretty good thing to know given that we're probably already working in specialty coffee. We want to know what that actually means. So first up, generally, like most of the high quality coffee you'll find in Australia is Arabica. And essentially Arabica is a plant that is a little bit more picky about the way it grows. It grows in higher altitude regions a lot better, so it produces better fruit yields. And the higher the altitude, generally the better quality of plant. And really the reason that happens is at higher altitudes we get lower temperatures. This plant's like really suited for temps as low as 15 degrees up to about 24. Whereas Robusta, comparatively, is usually found and grown better at higher temps of 24 degrees to 30 degrees. So it fares much better at lower altitudes, which, as you can imagine, if you're a farmer, is most likely where your farm is. Not many people have farms that are at super high altitude, but the ones that do, if they're doing high quality coffee, usually have Arabica planted. So some of the other things about the differences between these plants, Arabica has a slightly lower fruit yield, so you literally just don't get that much fruit off the tree. It's got very specific times that it fruits during the year, so there's generally just one harvest that you get off Arabica. So farmers are growing this, very, very seasonal. Usually they can't just have coffee as their main cash crop. If they're doing Arabica, they might have to change it with a few different things. Genetically, it's a bit more complex, so it has 44 chromosomes as compared to Robusta, which only has 22, which means that the depth and complexity of the genetics here gives you much more varied results, and it responds a lot better to the terroir of where it's being grown. So what that means for this plant is that it's more suited to that high quality output. You can really get different results depending on where it's grown. Whereas something like Robusta has a very coarse range of different flavours you can get from it, from growing it in different places and taking varying amounts of care. So it's as far as farmers go, like they're probably, if they're not very educated in terms of what cultivars to choose while they're planting their farms, they're going to go with something like Robusta. It seems like the obvious choice because it grows like crazy. You get a lot of fruit off it as well. It also, when it fruits, it does it somewhat sporadically, so you might get multiple harvests a year, which means it's a really sustainable crop to grow. You don't necessarily have to diversify what you grow, you can just have coffee. Obviously gives a lot more fruit, but the downside to Robusta is that being not so genetically complex, and due to most of the Robusta that's processed not having too much care put into it, it's often really, really low quality, and that results in a lower buying price. So it's kind of a bit of a trap. There's a lot of people growing Robusta around the world. Not a whole heap of it is very, very high quality or taken care and processed, so it has a low price most of the time. This is pretty on par with what you've heard about Robusta, Arabica.
Could you ever make a good Robusta as good as the average Arabica?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. There's some countries like India at the moment are producing Robustas that are like good, actually pretty good, and Robusta is still used like throughout the coffee industry as well as like kind of a filler in blends. But yeah, like I said, most specialty coffee places won't touch it, and it's got such a bad rap that even if someone took the time and care to process it, there's not a whole heap of buyers out there for it. But realistically, like 30% of the world's coffee is Robusta, so that's how much is sold in the world as a whole.
They're cross-breeding plants.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So we've got varieties in between called Coutura. So that's kind of like a really robust hybrid of Arabica and Robusta. Something I didn't mention is how resistant Robusta is to pests and disease. And you guys have probably heard of like coffee rust and some of the other pests affecting the industry at the moment. So with climate change and a few other things, some of the things that weren't really affecting the specialty coffee sector are now becoming real issues. High quality coffee is being lost throughout the world due to the spread of this rust up to higher altitudes. I mean, that's something that Robusta is effectively immune to. And one of the main reasons it is so immune is it has high caffeine content. And as far as pests go, that's something that's just a natural pest deterrent. So things don't attack the plant as much as they would Arabica. But yeah, so some of those crossbreeds in between are grown by farmers to try and be a bit more pest resistant. It's really, really common to find as well. But generally what you find is it's either Arabica or it's Robusta, and under that we've got some different cultivars as well, which people grow like different varietals like Pacamara or Bourbon. You guys heard of those terms before? Different plant varietals? So it's pretty crazy. Like if you look at a big tree of how many varieties of coffee there are, it's pretty immense. You guys probably don't
What
get
makes
it.
them different variety though?
So under the genus Caffeia, like the coffee genus, you've then got different species of the plants. And then just over time and evolution, it's grown into a whole heap of different
Like
varieties.
through you guys, like, breeding going for certain traits or with coffees?
Yeah, sometimes. I'd say that that's happened naturally over time, like people selecting whatever's giving the biggest cherries or maybe the best, probably not so likely the best flavour results, more just like how much it yields, how ripe the cherries are, all that sort of stuff. So just natural selection and a bit of artificial selection over time would have created a lot of those varieties. But it's also like where it's grown, where it's evolved over time, it would have created different different cultivars of the plant.
How regularly does it pollinate? Like how regularly does it seed spread?
So with Arabica, it's like once a year. So it kind of flowers, then it takes about 9 months to actually produce fruit. But for Robusta, it's like on and off all year. So you almost like at one time of the year, like constantly flowering and there's fruit on there at the same time. So both species are pretty different. Yeah, you've probably heard of things being in season with coffee, and what that usually means for Arabica is that 9 months before that point, things have flowered and then they've just picked the crop, processed it, and sent it out. And that's usually what seasonal coffee actually means, it's gone through that flowering. Any questions? Sweet.
Do all coffee fruit, they all like blossom at one time? Or is it just when you plant the crop and the weather and
As in like just one plant produce just flowers and then just cherries? Or do you mean
no,
like
is it all at the same time? Like how can they, like, because like some flowers, like they go in summer. So
That's
like why don't all coffee or bloom in like summer and then 9 months later you get fruit?
That's right. Yeah.
Is it
That's
like are
generally
there some that
what
are
happens.
like in winter and then you get 9 months after winter? So as in you can still have coffee 9 months on the other 9 months of the year.
Right, it's mostly seasonal.
Yeah.
So kind of what I was saying before, like Arabica behaves the way that you're describing now. It just gives you one crop a year, and then a different species of the plant will probably follow a similar pattern. So like let's say you had two varieties. We had like Bourbon and say Geisha growing in the same farm. They probably both flower at the same time due to the climate. And just following that natural cycle of growth. But if you had Robusta there, the growth is really, really different. The way it's pollinated is different as well. So that would probably give you fruit all year round. So you can see kind of how that's a really attractive choice for farmers if they're wanting to get a year
So
round crop.
Geisha is a variety of.
That's right, yeah, so it's an Arabica variety.
And so when you've got like the single origins,
Yeah.
that whatever, then like are they mixing different varieties just from the same place, or is it all like usually one variety or?
Could be a mixed bag, man. Like if you're buying from like a single estate from a farmer, for example with us, like we've got direct relationships with everyone we buy coffee off. But sometimes when you go to an origin, you don't really have the choice to have that relationship. Like to give you an example, Ethiopia is a great example of a place where it's really hard to track down exactly what's in the coffee because they've got something called the ECX, which is a commodities exchange. Because coffee is such a big cash crop for Ethiopia, legally all the farmers have to sell their coffee onto this market, and then anyone who wants to buy coffee has to buy from that market. And it's so untraceable that you don't know what varieties we put in there, you don't know where it comes from, and farmers and traders have to be really sneaky to find out exactly what they're getting there. Whereas on the flip side of that, somewhere like Guatemala, where we know the farmer, we've been to their farm, we've seen the coffee on the trees and then we've bought it, we know that it's like Pacamara and that's all been picked and very selectively and we know exactly what it is. So like throughout the world, like coffee's grown in so many different ways, it's really impossible to say exactly what you're getting unless you know. But that's where sort of traceability with trade is developing at the moment.
Are there any issues with GMOs? Is that everything?
Well, yeah, kind of like naturally, like when we talk about crossbreeding.
Okay.
There's
So
no one
that-
who's, well actually people are trying to, I think, breed caffeine-free coffee at the moment. There's actually some natural coffee that just doesn't have caffeine and it's Arabica and it's really rare and tastes okay. So instead of doing that decaf process, which kind of sucks and ruins coffee a little bit, hopefully you're finding some high quality versions of coffee that don't have it. They've been trying to genetically do that for years, but there's never been an instance of a GMO coffee like, spreading pests or disease or anything like that. But if you think about it, it's all genetically modified anyway, just through artificial selection. It's almost the same thing, just deliberate. But that's kind of what we're seeing, like farmers have planted Arabica, which is effectively a GMO, really susceptible to pests, really susceptible to disease, and they're losing entire crops, whereas the kind of crappier coffee is really resilient, or some of those crossbreeds are quite resilient, and they're not dying. So you'll have like an entire farm wiped out and one tree that's left over of a different cultivar. So I think that's the way the industry will change over the next 20 years, is seeing a lot of those crossbreeds and like Robusta Arabica hybrids actually the main cash crops, for sure. Did I answer your question, isn't it? Did I answer it?
Yeah.
No worries.
Why?
Yeah.
Isn't Arabica like naturally occurring?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But when you think about like, farmers selecting trees to grow, that's kind of like a version of artificial selection. So they're choosing like just the most high quality trees. So if those things are susceptible to pests and everyone's doing the same thing, then that's pretty disastrous. But there's no one really in a lab, developing heaps of cultivars and then that's spreading throughout the world. That's not the situation.
And what about an offer from Australia? Is that good?
Sometimes, not often.
Do you guys own rice at all?
We used to buy it back in the day. But the issue with Australia is just, do you guys know much about Australian coffee? Oh, sweet. I'll show you a slideshow. We're going to talk a little bit about it today. But essentially, like most of Australia's coffee is grown up around Byron Bay. And the other trainer that works here is like pretty heavily involved up in there. He works on the farm and does all sorts of stuff. But he's not here, sadly, to give us a lot more insight than I could. But essentially, like it's so expensive to really to grow coffee and then to process it down here that for a really average Australian coffee, you're paying the same price as a really high quality imported coffee. So it's not very competitive in the market. And if you wanted to support it, you'd have to be paying a premium for something which is not quite the same standard. So that's just the place that the industry is at the moment. But I've had some amazing Australian coffees, but you just never see them. Like some of the good ones that are out there are just kind of okay. And then there's a lot of rubbish as well. Yeah. There's not a whole heap that's good. And it's actually mostly to do with how we're processing. The farmers just aren't super knowledgeable. Like there's a few that are amazing and are trying really good things, like Mountaintop Estate. Have you guys heard of those?
Sounds like something.
Okay, that's okay. Well, Mountaintop are a pretty well-known Australian coffee farm that experiment with their processing a lot. They're really highly developed and sophisticated in how they do it. And they produce some micro-lots which are really actually incredible, really good. But most of that's exported to Japan. That's just kind of the way, because they just buy anything interesting. So we don't see too much in the Australian market. I'm happy to move on. Shall we power through the rest of this? It's taking a lot longer than I thought. That's always good. It's good that you guys are asking questions. It kind of makes this much more interesting than otherwise. So guys, a little bit about the insides of a coffee cherry. So I haven't actually shown you a picture of a coffee cherry yet, but what I might do is pass around some of these things. So in here we've got whole coffee cherries. So that's the pod that grows on the tree. I'll get you to pass that one around. And then underneath that, what we find inside the coffee pod are two of these guys. This is coffee in parchment. So essentially that's inside the cherry, and it's surrounded by that thick pulpy membrane. And that's what we end up with after we put it through a process called pulping. So I'll pass that around as well. You can actually, if you want to, take that outer layer off. And what you've got inside that is this final bit, which is the green coffee. So this is the end result of that processing. That's the part we export, import, roast. So it needs to go through a whole heap of processes to finally get to that stage. And
then we can, wait, what's under, oh, so this is the layer as well.
Yeah, so that's like a hard fibrous layer.
Can you roast it with that?
You cannot roast with that on. No, you take it off.
So you roasted very, very,
That's right. Yeah.
You do roasting courses?
We don't do roasting courses. It's a secret. I can tell you about roasting if you want, but can't give you specifics. But I mean, our job is pretty. It's actually pretty interesting. Like roasting is pretty sophisticated as far as the process and quality control and how much quality control you have to do. But really, anyone could roast coffee. You can get a popcorn maker, or you can buy a small roaster and turn green into brown. What's that?
It's not the same, though.
It could be if you spent the time. Like
Who do you think's roasting the
us, mate.
What's that?
We're pretty awesome.
No, I'm just biggest.
Yeah, so I think we're like it's interesting because like when you think about the coffee market in Australia, you can almost divide it into several different parts. You've got I look at it like there's specialty coffee and then there's the older, more traditional styles of coffee making. And we're part of that specialty sector, but we're also like scale-wise like much bigger than a lot of the really high-quality guys out there. So like some of my other favourite roasters that do a really good job, are like guys at Ribbon Hills in Sydney, they do a pretty amazing job. They're like Seven Seeds and a couple other guys from Sydney got together and made a company over there. Kind of like the guys at Proud Mary do. We've got a good relationship with them. They're pretty out there, but they're also.
And he does everything in the shop.
What's that, man?
He roasts everything in that shop.
I just got over the street.
William says it?
Yeah, I think so.
That's a good
Or,
guy.
yeah, they're good guys. Yeah, so we're pretty tight knit with those guys. They do amazing stuff.
So
Where do
they
you
buy
go
from you.
What's that, man?
Where do you guys roast?
We roast out in Shelburne. So we've got a factory out there with proper roasters. And this is where we do our packing and delivery and all that sort of stuff. But what you find like with roasters, the supply chain is, it's mostly the same. Like we'll kind of go through it and talk about the wide industry. In fact, I'll probably give you a quick run through now. Didn't really want to get into this because it's such a big detailed thing. But essentially, once we've spoken about what farmers do, the role they play, we've got a big industry built up around import and export. And the way that roasting works in Australia at the moment, you're kind of one of two camps if you're a coffee roaster. You're either buying your green from a merchant in Australia or you're managing to import that green coffee yourself. So we're firmly in that other camp where we're direct trade. So all the coffee we buy, we know the people we buy it off. We're trying to do it all as much as possible. But then we have also green bean merchants in Australia. Their job is to go out and find all that green. So if you're a smaller roaster, you can just buy directly from those guys, and then you've got access to stuff that's from Nicaragua, Kenya, Africa in general. So yeah, that's kind of where it's at. And then out of that old school, you probably think of some big old school roasters, like not naming names, but those guys would buy really like average quality coffee, maybe some commodity grade stuff, and they'd be really like the prices would be a lot lower than what you get in a specialty coffee roastery as well. So yeah, it's pretty varied, pretty different.
Do you supply green beans to a lot of the small roasters?
No, we don't. Well, we've actually just bought a coffee mill in Sumatra. So this will be the first time that we actually have produced coffee ourselves that we're going to on-sell to other people, but it's not like, we don't even know what's going to go on with that at the moment. There's nothing established. You'll probably see that coffee pop up in a few years on the market, but we're not really selling much green. There's not a whole heap of merchants in Melbourne. You guys know any green bean merchants in Melbourne? Have you heard of Michael Planning? Yeah, so they're called Melbourne Coffee Merchants, MCM. So those guys import green and they can sell to other roasteries. Silo, heard of Silo? Yeah. I'm not Silo, but Silo I used, but the Silo, other Silo. So those guys are also green bean merchant. So they do the same sort of job. They import, probably on sell to Seven Seeds, and then they do a lot of sales to other roasteries around Australia too. But a really different sort of game to what we were in, which is just roasting coffee, importing, roasting, different. So guys, let's power through. We keep chatting about this stuff as much as you like. You're going to be here till about, I think, 4:30 today. So if you do have any questions, like fire away. It's actually a good stimulating discussion. So we already talked about this. What's in a coffee cherry? As you can tell, like, there's a lot of stuff going on there that needs to be removed before we actually get to the point where it's roasted. And all of those different stages affect the way that coffee tastes. So we'll go through that a bit later under that headline, processing. That's really good stuff to know, especially for guys working in cafes. And is that the gist out of you guys? I know you guys are working as baristas, so you that owner, Dylan? Yeah, cool, man. And you guys, are you all making coffee at the farm as well? Working as baristas? And you're also from the farm?
Yeah, I'm a barista.
But you're not a barista. Where do you from?
I'm the same.
Oh, yeah, these guys as well.
Baristas, how many staff do they have?
Push
Like
five.
Lots of very interesting.
And you started food. Yeah, cool, man. Fun topic as well. So a lot of the stuff we're going to cover today, like it's obviously really in depth, but the core things I really want to leave you with are the sort of things you could easily discuss with a customer that are actually interesting, and you're not just kind of making it up or filling in the gaps. We want to give you some meaningful things that actually we want to pass on, like really good messages to people. So we'll get to that stuff. This is a good thing to talk about now. So the way that coffee is harvested is the big thing with quality. It makes a bit of a difference. And generally in the world we find that most coffee is either hand-picked or it's machine-picked. So hand-picking is obviously a really labour-intensive method of collecting coffee. But one of the great things about hand-picking is that if you've got a human being standing up there at a coffee plant, they can be really selective about what they're picking off the tree. So what would some of the benefits of that be, do you think? What would be a good thing to have someone? Is it
Better quality coffee.
better quality? Yep.
No?
So we can pick the same level of quality of the tree. So in the world of farming, that's just a stage of ripeness. So generally if someone's hand-picking, they're looking to take the same stage of ripeness coffee off the plant. So if you have a look up, you guys are going to struggle, sorry, but just behind you there, you'll notice we've got up in those baskets on the left-hand side in that picture. That's selectively picked coffee. I took these photos in Bali about 2 years ago, and we've just gone around to the trees and just chosen the most ripe stuff. Versus the stuff that's kind of in the middle, that's stuff that's actually on a Robusta farm, so a farm that's just growing Robusta. And those guys, they just take kind of everything off the tree. So that's unripes, overripes, stuff that's pretty ripe and good. So that's going to make a big difference in the development of the flavour of the coffee and also the consistency of the roasting process. If we would buy that coffee, it probably wouldn't behave the way we wanted it to. So handpicking's it's a really great way to ensure quality, but obviously it requires a lot of labour. That's one of the reasons you don't see it too often in Australia, but in other labour markets around the world, where people aren't paid quite as much, it's very, very common to see 20 people on a farm during the day taking that coffee off the tree. So a variant of handpicking is branch stripping. So really, really simply, instead of being selective, people just take everything off the tree. So that has some obvious issues. One, you're taking everything. So you're getting overripes, underripes, and ripes. You're taking leaves, sticks, twigs, spiders, beetles, all that sort of stuff. So with this sort of processing, it's really common to see low quality coffee, which a farmer knows isn't really going to necessarily attract a higher price if they put in all that additional effort with picking. This is probably the most common way of actually picking it. They're just taking everything, lay it out to dry just in that picture in the middle there. And then they get paid by weight of the green seed. So that's essentially what we call commodity grade coffee, where anything goes, they're just getting a weight-based value. That being said, on some farms which have their trees set up to grow really well, they might be under a canopy of trees, everything might ripen really evenly. So this is a really quick and effective way of picking. So depending on the farm, this can be a really great method of picking, but obviously they need to sort it after to get it really high quality. So that's the example from that picture up there on the wall of really selectively picked coffee. So as you can see, everything's the same shade of red or pretty close to it. And what this means for us is that the development of the seed inside there is going to be really, really consistent. And this is one of the first steps in the quality chain to getting really, really great coffee, after, of course, a farmer having grown a really amazing tree and then looked after it and produced great fruit, choosing the right fruit afterwards is a really good important part of the process. Now that's a bit of a contrast to this. Or if you're tasting from an origin that naturally has really high acidity and you want to account for that, you can score that up here, but objectively you might score it a little bit lower.
Do you want high acidity? I never understood acidity.
Okay. Yep.
Is it good to have high acidity or is it more low acidity?
It's generally associated with really high quality coffee. So stuff that's really, really high grown develops a lot more acidity to it. And when coffee is brewed correctly, if it's a high acid coffee, it really just boosts the entire profile. So some great examples of that. Have you guys ever had a geisha before? Like a really good geisha?
Yeah, I have one, but I didn't actually like it. So.
Okay, that's okay. Well, there's good geishas and then there's good
It was a
geishas.
proud Mary, so I assumed it was good.
Well, there's a lot of geishas on the market. I mean, every owner can be a little bit hit and miss, but the times I've really had a good one have been at the Brewers Cup when people are just going absolutely crazy with their attention to detail. And it's incredible. It's like drinking a hot cup of wine. Like it's really intense. It's really sparkly. It's like mandarins, which isn't really common. Like usually when you drink coffee, you get really specific notes. But yeah, when it's there and when it's brewed correctly, it's really incredible, and it just boosts the whole profile of the coffee. And every coffee has acidity in it. Our ability to detect it and differentiate between acidity, bitterness, and saltiness, and sweetness, that's really key to our understanding of it and where it kind of fits into everything. But I agree, like overly sour coffees are not fantastic. But on this score sheet, we'd score that down. If something had a sour note, we'd be like, get rid of it. Whereas if it was kind of bright and snappy, tasted like apples, that's a really good acidity. Makes sense?
Yeah.
But not everyone likes it, which is fair. So guys, sorry this cut out. Now we'll just quickly jump back in and talk a bit about other ways that coffee's harvested. So a lot of coffee around the world is machine harvested. Most coffee in Australia is going to be machine harvested as well. I'll very quickly show you this PowerPoint. So these are some pictures from a coffee farm in Byron Bay, which is called Mountaintop. This is the farm I was talking about before. And as you'll see, these guys are very organised, so very regimented in the way the coffee's grown. This is that one time of the year when the coffee's flowering, so this is like pre-harvest. It'll take many, many months for that coffee to come to maturity and finally grow into a fruit that they can pick. But that's how a really well-organised coffee farm looks. It's basically coffee grown in rows. And the reason they grow it in rows like that is because they're going to use machinery to pick it. And that machinery actually goes in between those rows and envelops the whole tree to knock all the cherries off. So that's the harvester. You'll see up here there's a little glass bit where you sit, and you essentially drive over the tree. And these little spokes here, they spin around and they knock all the cherries off and they catch it. And then it gets spat out into a little catchment at the side. And then it needs to go through a whole heap of processing to remove anything that's different and then sort the coffee into various grades. So you can probably see it, not so clearly, but a little bit. There's like leaves in there. There's a whole heap of different sorts of cherries. I think these trees are, I actually don't really know the varieties, but most of the coffee in Australia is called K7, which is Arabica that comes from Kenya originally. And most of the commercial crops in Australia are probably made of that. In fact, if you guys ever buy a coffee tree for home, like for example those ones out there, they're all K7 varieties. Now it's interesting, I think these guys have coffee trees which fruit both yellow and red fruits at the same time, and I think that means they're a crossbreed, so a hybrid of Arabica and Robusta. But essentially what these guys do once they've picked it is put it through a whole bunch of processing that separates it out. So as you can see here, this is a little conveyor belt which is going to drop away all the cherries through those holes, and it's going to allow those to pass through, but it's going to keep all the leaves and twigs and sticks and anything bigger on top. So this is their first preliminary way of sorting the coffee. I'll show you one more thing. Sorry guys. So once that coffee's been picked, the processing is the next part, which is really going to make the biggest difference. So the first part of processing is making sure that the coffee is actually sorted as much as possible before they then take away the fruit layers or they move on to the next steps of processing.
Can you eat extra fruit?
You can, yeah. It's, most people that are like on farms, if they're just eating the fruit, they actually get rid of the fruit and they suck the seeds. The seeds are like really sweet. And the fruit's kind of like, you know, if you guys ever had cascara, you know, the tea that you make from coffee pulp? Okay, cool. It's really acidic and it is a bit sour. Kind of, it's got a really strange taste, a little like pawpaw. Not altogether pleasant. So guys, processing is a big thing, and this is one of those things that you guys should know when you work in a cafe. If you're selling a coffee to a customer, the way that coffee's processed has a massive effect on the flavour. And it has such a big effect to the point that if you took the same cherries off the tree and processed them in 2 different ways, you wouldn't really be able to guess that they're the same coffee if you were just cupping them blind. That's how much of a different cup result you can get from it. So most of the coffee you'll find in Australia is processed in this way. It's wet processed. And most of the coffee around the world is wet processed as well. So the way it works, all the coffee is fed into something called a pulper. I'll show you a video of that a little bit later. But what the pulper does is squeeze away those outer layers of fruit and it pops out the seed. And so what we're left with is a whole bunch of green coffee that's a little bit slimy, covered in sticky membrane. All of that stuff then gets soaked, and that can be for quite a long period of time. Most is at least 24 hours. And what that soaking does is start a fermentation process that breaks down the sugar, and it's much easier then to rinse the coffee and get it ready for the next couple of steps of processing, which is effectively just drying out the coffee and getting it ready to remove that parchment layer. So that's in a nutshell what wet processing is. They essentially take away the fruit, they soak the seeds, and then that seed is then washed and then dried out. And then once it's dried out, it's usually ready to be moved on to something called hulling. And that's where they take away that parchment layer that we saw in that cup just there. Now the big contrast to this is natural or dry processing. Have you guys heard of natural coffee before? Yeah. Sweet. Well, on the table today, we've actually got a natural mixed in with the rest of them. And it's a pretty classic natural. It's like really big and fruity and not super acidic. So it'll be interesting to compare that to some of the wet processed coffees that are over there. But the main difference in this processing is that they leave the fruit on to dry it out. So everything's picked off the tree, they might sort it really, really thoroughly, and then it's left to dry, usually in the sun, sometimes in machines, but usually in the sun. And it can be dried anywhere up to 16 days. So that coffee we're looking at in that second photo up there, the stuff that's just been laid out to dry, they leave it there for about 12 to 13, 14 days, and then they send it off and the whole thing gets hulled, and really they just end up with the seeds at the end. Now this is not considered a really great way to process coffee by the majority of farmers throughout the world. Why do you think that would be? It's time consuming, yeah. So it might require a lot more maintenance. We have to be there, we have to move it around, that sort of stuff. But it's a much more simple way to go. You really just, instead of going through all those other processes, you're just laying it out to dry. What do you think the main difference in quality would be between these two processing methods? Yeah, it is.
There could be advantages to both, no?
Absolutely, yeah.
To just give you a different flavour.
That's right, yeah. Exactly. That's very, very true. And I guess the thing on the face of it that this processing does, so the natural processing, is it lets a lot of those fruit flavours get into the coffee. So if it's done right, you end up with really fruity results in the cup and a really heavy body from some of those bits of fruit actually making their way into the seed. Whereas on the flip side of that, a wash process has some of these characteristics. It's got preserved acidity, so it's usually quite clean and bright. and it doesn't add any flavours into the coffee. So for us, it really just gives you a true representation of what the farmer actually did to the plant, how well it was picked, how well it was sorted, what process preserves that. Whereas a natural process adds some extra stuff in. I guess the answer I was looking for in the quality difference between these is control over that whole process. With a wash process, if you're taking those seeds out of the cherry, putting it in a vat of water, you've got many opportunities to control every step of that process. Whereas with a natural process, usually you're drying it in the sun, you're kind of leaving it exposed to the elements. There's not as many opportunities to really get in there and control how it's drying. You've got to have a lot of care, move the coffee around a whole lot. So a bit more simple, but really hard to control. Now there are some other ways to process coffee, a lot of ways in between. You'll often hear them referred to as a pulp natural or a semi-washed or a honey processed coffee. I don't know if you guys have heard any of those terms before. But essentially, if a coffee is pulped and then left with any amount of fruit intact and then dried out, that's where we'd start to call it different things. So that's an example of a pulp natural. We just took the fruit away and then sun-dried that coffee with that little bit of fruit and sticky stuff left over. We get kind of a cross in between a washed and a natural. It'd be kind of fruity from some of that introduced fruit, but then it'd be clean with a much more reserved acidity as well, so we wouldn't let that acidity decay too much. The issue with that is it's really hard to control, so it's really rare that you guys would taste a fantastic pulp natural that's been done with a lot of quality control, although we have one, I hope, today on the table. So I've got some good examples of these processing types. Now guys, I just wanted to show you a really quick example of a relationship we used to have in Bali. So we don't buy too much coffee from this group of farmers anymore. But back in the day, we spent a lot of time going over and developing infrastructure. And once a year, in fact, we've just kind of come back from it. We do an annual trip to Bali where we've got some trees planted and we've got good relationships with people up there. So this is a good example of just one origin, how they go about doing things, and there's some great pictures in here of the locals and also their procedures. So this is one of the later parts of the process. So this is past pulping and it's past soaking. So they've already taken the fruit off, it's already been sorted, and they've been left with those seeds in water. They do it for about 36 hours and then they take it out, it gets scrubbed, and then it all gets laid out to dry on these raised drying beds. And what these guys are doing is going through and taking out by eye anything they can see, which is a different colour. Maybe it's a coffee, a little bit of coffee that hasn't been pulped correctly. It might be a really small cherry that got through the mix. All that stuff then gets removed and put aside. It's also laid out on these raised beds so they get a more even drying process, after which it's then left just like that on those tarps, and then it's just swept around periodically every couple of hours. So for these farmers, that's how they process their crop. They actually grow up a few things as well. They're orange farmers. I saw a whole heap of chicken coops there, so they're doing that as well. So these are some pictures of Arabica growing on the tree. So this is the same coffee that you saw laid out to dry before. So as you can tell, when it's growing on the tree, it's fruiting and ripening at different stages. So there's some really ripe stuff there with a whole bunch of underripe stuff. So if we took all of that stuff now, you'd get some stuff that tasted pretty good with some stuff that tasted immature, so kind of sour and not quite ripe. So that's an example of unripe coffee cherries. They're really green, kind of look like olives. And as you can see here, this is where the flowers have dropped off. And you're just left with a little pod there, and that develops fully into a cherry quite quickly after that's happened. So a little bit of picking here. This is the time when we were picking all those cherries that we saw in that photo just up there. So we're taking just the ripest stuff. And it takes a long time. Like, we were exposed to this for about an hour and a half, and it took each person an hour and a half just to fill up one of those baskets. And admittedly, we're a lot slower than the farmers themselves, so we're used to doing it. But it's it's hard work. It is a lot of work. So it's only right that these guys get paid fairly for what they do. This is an example of a pulper. So I've got a video of one in action that I'll show you guys before we jump up and do some tasting. But essentially all the coffee gets dumped in the top after it's been sorted by hand. And then it all gets spat out just like this. So on one side we get a big pile of the coffee pulp. That usually gets recycled, used as fertiliser. I think these guys put it straight into a worm farm. And then they use it on their trees a little bit later. And as you can tell, it really cleanly takes out all those coffee seeds. And then I don't really have a good picture of it, but that's a vat back there. That all that coffee gets put in bulk, and they get soaked for X amount of time. It's probably about a day and a half before it then gets removed and scrubbed down and then laid out to dry. So that's their process for their coffee. If you ever go and get the chance to go to a farm, you'll see just how simple that process is. And it's also potentially a really easy process if you don't have much quality control as well. So it's pretty interesting, like adding in all these extra procedures, it creates more labour, but the price of the coffee also goes up and up. The more work they put in, the better the quality gets, so the more people get paid for it.
Do they get paid well?
Yeah, with these guys, we were paying kind of like an investment. So we would buy the coffee at a really good price, and then they'd be putting in a lot of additional procedures to improve the quality over time. But I don't think we're buying much coffee from these guys anymore. We're just buying a little bit of stuff that we've planted in a different region of Bali. So this is the coffee after soaking. So what's happened to this stuff is being left soaking in that water, all the sugary membrane has started to ferment, breaks down into the water, it's all really slimy, and then what we did is then take it and scrub it and then get it ready to be sun-dried. But all the coffee that we took off these trees, we then took up into some mountains in a place called Git and planted it. We've got a little nursery up there. So we did a cupping while we were up there, that was good fun. And then we had a chance to go check out a farm that we weren't buying from, which were growing Robusta. And this is an example of Robusta growing on the trees. It's a little bit different. As you can tell, it looks like it's fruiting a lot more. And these are the guys that, when they pick it, essentially just lay it all out to dry, just like that. And it kind of doesn't make sense for these guys to put in a whole heap of effort into what they do, because even if they did selectively pick it, if you remember Robusta not being so genetically complex, it wouldn't really fetch that much in terms of market value. So it'd be hard to sell this for more money than would be justified for putting in all that effort. So it's a pretty interesting position for farmers to be in. If they don't have really great quality crops, the turnaround of getting really great quality crops is about 5 years once they've planted a tree. So it's a very difficult process to go from growing Robusta to Arabica. It's not quite as simple as just ripping out trees, planting new ones. It's a big investment. It takes a lot of time to actually make that change. So we'll just fly through some of these. Got some really great pictures of coffee growing in the wild. So this is Robusta growing up in a mountainous region called Git. And it's essentially a forest. And just to give you an idea of scale, that's a coffee tree, and that's someone's shorts just down the bottom. So these are massive trees. They've been growing wild.
And you guys, that's your crops?
No, this is just like naturally grown coffee. Yeah, so it's already kind of there. So we've taken coffee from the other region where we were buying it and moved it up to this really high altitude region and try and get some really amazing coffee. We've actually just picked the first amount of it, so we're yet to see how it tastes, but it's pretty exciting. So this is how we picked it. You bend the whole tree down, rip off all the coffee, and this is Robusta, so we just got taken up by some locals who've shown how they're picking it, and this is essentially someone's backyard. And this is the reality of coffee. The majority of farmers throughout the world are really small shareholders, and they're producing a little bit of coffee and then getting together as a group and selling it by weight, and that's what we're seeing here. So guys, that's just a little taster of what it's like to go to Origin. But let me show you this video. This is a different part of Indonesia, Sumatra. Now, Indonesia is a really interesting place for coffee because there's a lot of mountains up there. And there's a lot of perfect climate for growing coffee, but they don't produce like or are known for the best quality coffee in the world. So one of the biggest reasons for that is it's just really hard to go in there and find that really great stuff, or find the farmers that are doing a really amazing job. So we've been there for a long time, just kind of building contacts, looking for opportunities, and when we first started going up there, we took a little bit of video on what it was like. So this is before we've actually bought coffee from there. So I'll let you have a look through this, see if you can spot a couple of things. There's a great video of a pulper in here, so you get to see one of those in action, as well as a whole heap of shots of just coffee growing and picking and processing. So check this out, see what you think. So guys, we're going to now move on and just do a whole bunch of tasting. I just wanted to just rattle off a little bit of additional theory stuff for you while we're here. So I'll give you one of these books. These are just for you to read during the session if you're interested. I was saying at the start of the session today that you know, the difference between specialty and commodity coffee and what those terms actually mean. In the industry, we've got a few different ways of classifying what quality is and how it's assessed. So this is a really good standardised approach. This is a book produced by the Specialty Coffee Association of America. And what this is if you have a little flick through, a whole bunch of things we can identify in green coffee that affect the flavour of coffee once it's roasted, and generally it's the consistency. Well, having these in there will make it a little bit more inconsistent as a product. So when we're looking at buying a green sample, usually when a farmer finishes producing something, or when you buy a big co-op, they've picked all the coffee, they've bagged it up and it's ready to be sold. And what we ask for is a sample before we buy it. So what they might do is go around and they take, out of all of these different bags of coffee, a random amount, and then we take a full 350 gram sample, which is a cross-section of all that coffee, and then we go through it and we assess how many defects it has. And the number of defects and the type of defects puts in a certain category. And those categories, by this definition, are specialty coffee, there's premium grade coffee, and there's commodity grade coffee. So commodity grade is almost like anything goes. So you can pretty much have whatever you like in there. And the vast majority of I think farmers around the world are people producing Robusta. That means they get a basic level of value for whatever crop they have. So it's kind of protecting their security. They can always get guaranteed price. And that price is almost set like a commodities exchange market as well. We call it the C price. And that fluctuates depending on demand as well. So that's a way that people get fair prices for coffee. If you want to attach a premium to it, we've got these standards just here. So a specialty grade coffee is a coffee that has no category 1 defects and no more than 5 secondary defects. And those defects are defined on that next page just over here. So a specialty coffee shouldn't have any of these things in it. So these are actually really obvious things, like a full black, a full sour, a dried cherry pod, something that's fungus damaged, or foreign matter, or severe insect damage, which you need 5 of to qualify as a full defect. If any of those things are found in a green sample, that means it's not considered specialty. So you can imagine grinding up a whole cherry pod. One of the cupping samples over there would just taste like really crazy and whack. Let me just quickly grab some of the samples so you can check out what these defects actually look like. That's an example. It's not 350 grams, but we get like a big sample like that. Before we bought it, we want to go through and just pick out anything which looks remotely strange, or anything like this, which is foreign matter. These guys look kind of normal. So in there we put some sort of slight insect damage. These are the really small cherry pods that might make it through. So that's some category 1 defect stuff just there. Hanging around somewhere, I've got a whole heap of full blacks and sours and things like that. So these are just off-colour green that have actually rotted, and that can happen in a variety of different ways, but all of these defects occur because of the way the coffee's been grown or processed. So usually really high quality coffee, being looked after at all their stages, will have relatively few defects by comparison, and that allows someone to sell it for a little bit more. It's a little bit more consistent, it generally tastes a little bit better as well. And that's kind of where that term specialty coffee comes from. Although you've probably noticed, like culturally in Australia, it means a whole heap of different things. It's associated with a certain style of cafe, a certain style of service as well. So the meaning of it has kind of taken on something new in the industry around the world. It's not just the quality of green, although from a trading perspective, that's what it actually means. That's what specialty coffee is. So I hope that gives you a bit of an idea on how we classify coffee. You've probably heard of other ways that coffee's scored. Has anyone heard of the Cup of Excellence before? You know what that is? Yes, you guys heard of that? Right, cool. What about the Q grader? Does anyone know what a Q grader is? Right, sweet. Silence. So those are pretty much different classification systems. So Cup of Excellence is a competition that's run for farmers around the world, and it's origin specific. So there's a couple of excellence in Brazil, there's one in Guatemala, there's one in Mexico, and it's a competition for farmers to enter their coffee, and then their coffee's cupped 5 times and really rigorously analysed and scored. And then anything that scores above a certain threshold, I think it's about 87 or 88, is then considered a Cup of Excellence coffee, and it's given branding, and then it's sold on an internet auction. And it fetches like ridiculous prices. Like some of the top selling lots, the ones that score the highest, sell for about $200 a kilo. So pretty, and that's green. So like before roasting it, before doing all that other stuff, that's how much it costs. So that stuff, Japan, straight away. Most people over there. But like we buy some of that coffee as well. Usually we'll go up with a few other roasteries, and we like that one.
And what is their culture that? Their coffee culture that big that they're...
Yeah, I mean, it's, they love high quality and really interesting stuff. Absolutely. Japan and China, so tea cultures, tea drinking cultures, really value like high grain coffee or interesting or different coffee. Sure.
How do they normally run it?
As in like, how do they make it?
Yeah.
I actually don't know. I don't know too much about it. I think there's relatively few espresso bars, and it's more like filter coffee. Get that impression, like Japan, siphons.
Do you think so?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sounds right.
It does, yeah. So, yeah, well, I don't know too much about those markets. I wish I did. Have better answers for you. So, guys, that's pretty much it as far as you know, how coffee's grown, how it's processed, how it's analysed, how it's sold, all those sort of things. You guys have any more questions along those lines? Anything that stands out? All right, beautiful. So let's move on and just do a little bit of tasting. So what I've got in front of you here are 4 little paper cups per person, and then we've got a spit cup as well. This is going to come in really helpful because a lot of the stuff we're going to be tasting, you don't necessarily want to ingest it. It's not poisonous, but it doesn't taste very good. So what we're going to do is actually work our way through the score sheet in a way. I'm going to give you a couple of different things to taste. And after everyone's had a taste, I want to discuss where everyone's getting the sensation of that particular solution on their tongue. And then we're going to relate it to where that fits in on the score sheet, and obviously then how you'd apply that directly to analysing a coffee objectively. So you'll see just behind here I've got a whole bunch of different solutions. So I'm going to start with something pretty easy on the palate. Alright, so in just one of your little paper cups, just pour yourself a tiny little bit of that and pass it along. And maybe just wait till everyone's got a little bit of the solution. See, maybe I'll come around and do it for you. No worries. Gave you a bit too much. So what we're starting with here is something really obvious. That's okay. Yeah, it's a 6. Alright guys, what I want you to do, I'm just going to grab this little cup here. What I want you guys to do is let's get this liquid and swirl it, and then just drink a little bit of it and then spit it out. So spit it out into your big cup. Don't be shy, spitting is okay today. It's totally cool. Have a little sip. So how would you guys describe that?
Sweet.
Sweet. Bang on, absolutely. So this is a really easy one. Now what I want you to do is have another little sip of that, and I want you to tell me, like, from the start to the finish, what it's kind of like doing on your tongue. Where are you picking it up on your tongue? Is it coating? Is it something that stays for a long time? Is it something that's really intense and then disappears? Have a little sip and then tell me that.
Do we have to spit it out? It's nice.
Oh, you can drink it. Go for it. Alright. So let's talk about just generally what the sensation is like. So you got it in your mouth. How does it behave? Is it intense?
Sweet on the palate.
It's sweet on the palate. So where are you detecting that sweetness? If this is a map of your tongue.
In the back, maybe?
The back? Yeah, so like maybe like right at the end it's kind of like it's changing. It's like a little bit starchy on the finish. It changes. But then up front, this is something that really like coats the whole tongue, like right through the middle. And a lot of people kind of get it at the teeth as well. So this is definitely something that's coating. Would you say it's lingering?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right? So this isn't something that after we've tasted it just like disappears straight away. This is something that stays in your mouth. And you notice it kind of changes. It almost gets a bit savoury after you've had it sitting in your mouth for a little while. And that's when we start to notice other things. Like around here, it might taste a little bit salty. Interesting, right? So we'll move on to something else. So you can either empty the liquid out of that cup or use a fresh one. I don't mind. Either way.
Oh, you took out one.
Oh, sorry. Don't want to leave you out. Okay, you probably saw the writing on this one. What have we got? Okay. So what we're saying about sweet, we're saying about sweet that it starts with that kind of intensity. It kind of does this, like sweetness starts sort of intense, and then it really gradually kind of disappears off the palate. So what does salty do?
Disappears quickly, right?
Yeah. But it's almost like alkaline, right? So you get sort of, it's just like a little battery sort of sensation in your mouth. And most of us have salt, like right through the middle, just there. So that's the place it actually shows up. If you've got a little bit left, have another sip. But what happens with salt is that intensity goes from here and then it just quickly kind of disappears. You might be left with a dry palate afterwards, but it's not something that stays around for quite a long time. Whereas, by contrast, sugar stays for ages and it's kind of lingers. So how do these things relate to coffee? Sweetness is naturally occurring in coffee. So we get sucrose, given that it's a fruit, kind of makes sense. Sugar is affected by the brewing process, so depending on the brew water temperature, the fineness of our grind, the duration, that'll determine the total amount of sweetness we have in coffee, but also the genetics of the coffee, how it's processed, and all those sort of things as well, they also affect it. So you notice you don't really have a place on that score sheet where you can say how sweet a coffee is. It's almost implied. If you've got a really bitter coffee, that's going to score a little bit lower in flavour, but if you've got a really sweet coffee, that's going to score a little bit higher in flavour. So that's kind of how the stuff's factored in. But the thing that salt is, so if I write some stuff up about salty, has anyone got a little bit of salt left? Draw out. It's alright. So you might have noticed that this is a little bit thicker than this guy is as well. So we've actually changed the texture of the water by adding that salt in. So typically what this does is give us an indicator of what it's like to have a different body in coffee. So if there's more things that float in the water instead of kind of dissolving in the water, it will thicken that liquid up. And that's where we get a much thicker result from this. The other thing that salt does is mask other flavours, and we'll kind of experiment with that a little bit later. I'll mix a couple of things together for you. So I'm going to pass around a different one now. A little bit of this guy. Maybe go easy with this, I think I made it a little bit strong. This is battery acid. Okay guys, I want you to have a sip of this and think about some of the discussion we've already had. So I want to know, is this something that lingers for a long time? I want to know roughly where you're getting it on your tongue. So sweetness is kind of like, almost like through here.
Yeah.
Tastes like lemons.
Tastes really good.
Does anyone like that?
I kind of like it.
Oh, nice. Yeah. It reminds me of Warheads. I don't know if you guys have nostalgia. Acid. Straw little frogman, right? Cool, so what's this like? How's it behaving? Is it more similar to the salt or the sugar?
Salt.
Yeah, it's a bit more like salt. It's pretty intense, and then it's boom. But there's not too much there. Where are you picking it up on your palate? Tongue. So it's like really dry, sort of, yeah. Anyone getting it anywhere else?
Is it on the sides?
Yeah, sides.
Yeah.
Most of us will get it just here, like it's really dry. Now, this is just one type of acid. Coffee actually has numerous types of acid. So this is citric acid. This is the sort of thing that you'd find in baking. It really boosts the flavour profile or something. What I'd like you to do is actually grab a little bit of this. I'm going to pass them around in opposite directions. So pour yourself some citric and pass it on. And pour yourself a little bit of sweet. We're going to mix them together and see the effect that citric acid actually has on the profile of that sweetness.
You want them mixed together?
We're going to mix them together, yeah. So this is a little bit more realistic for us. This is what we get with coffee. Yeah,
Now I've got some. Have you got some?
mix a little bit of that in.
That was lemon stuff, yeah?
That's right.
Yeah.
Got some of that. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
It's a good drink.
Tastes okay?
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it tastes good, but it's more balanced.
Yeah.
For sure. More balanced. So there's more stuff going on, right? And it's a little bit more. And usually saying it's more balanced means it's lighting up the palate. Probably a little bit more fully as well. Whereas sweet was just like kind of coating and undefined. Now adding that acidity in, it gives it a bit more depth and structure. Is anyone enjoying this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of addictive. Sweet. So I guess like the sensations we get from acidity, like what it tends to do, again, it's very bright on the palate, so it tends to add a little bit of snappiness to our profile. So it's actually a good thing in coffee because it enhances sugar. That's almost the positive note of acidity. So it's very bright. I would say it's kind of sharp, and we get it around the edges of our tongue as well. And generally, it's a sugar booster. But what we generally don't get is, so we mix a little bit of salt in with that, we thickened it up, it actually masks it just a little bit as well. What I want to do is pass around a few different sorts of acids in a sec, but I want you to try passing that guy around first. Actually, sorry. Get a decent amount of that in your cup. So what are we missing out here? We've only really got 5 things that we can taste. There's sweet, salt, acid, There's umami, which we're not really going to cover today, unless we have mushrooms or something handy. What's the other one?
Bitter.
Bitter. Yeah. So sour would be acidity. So usually without the presence of sweetness, we get a very sour acid. That would make for a very low quality acidity. Whereas a sweet coffee with acidity is generally pretty good. So this last one I'm handing around is called quinic acid. This is actually really hard to find in Australia, but we're lucky enough to have a little bit.
Wait, should we be selling this stuff?
No, don't do that. I mean, it's okay. Yeah, it's food safe, food grade. It's safe.
It doesn't taste like
It
it.
doesn't taste like anything, right? No. But I just want you, like, it's absolutely tasteless, but it should have an effect on your tongue in some way.
Dry.
It's dry. Yeah, absolutely. And usually it's dry, like, kind of at the back here.
Yeah, it's not.
It's weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yep. Some people say it's almost medicinal, but it just has, it's very bizarre. It's very bizarre. But this is the quality we get from a over-extracted coffee as well. It's that drying of the palate, and it's usually associated with bitterness as well. So some of the things that we aren't getting here, one thing we are getting is, so it's very dry on the palate. Some things we're not getting here are phenolic qualities. And these are things that would come into the brewing process through over-extraction, or it could be like a not so great coffee. It has a lot of chlorogenic acid, or a lot of caffeic acid. And these are the two things I'm going to pass around to you now. So if you could put one of these in each of your cups. So I might pass this around. Yeah, sorry, let me get a spit repository. This is going to be the grossest part today. Get in on that. No one drink that.
Yeah. I think that. Why you need both?
Okay, guys. So just remember which is which out of these two. So these are examples of. So we should have chlorogenic acid there and caffeic acid. So chlorogenic acid is one of the most prevalent acids in coffee, and it's got sort of a medicinal characteristic to it. So that's like an example of something which is phenolic character.
So what do you mean, like,
Yeah.
where do you get these things from?
Well, the solutions are just like chemicals.
And you've compared them to, is it an actual chemical thing that comes out of the coffee?
Yes, it is. Yeah, so these are all naturally occurring in coffee. But I guess the relevancy of it today is we get all these flavours in coffee, but we don't really get an opportunity to taste them separately. So I've just made the solutions up so you can try, see what it's like. But if we mix all these together now, it would taste like a really poor cup of coffee, for sure.
This smells like robots.
Is that a tea?
Robots? Yeah.
Strong.
Yeah. Something's good. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so one of them, I think the caffeic acid, I think that occurs, like as coffee is cooling down, chlorogenic acid actually changes. It splits into two different parts. One of them is caffeic acid, and I think the other is quinic. So that's the first one you try, that sort of bitter, drying sensation. And the caffeic has that medicinal sort of quality to it, whereas chlorogenic acid is, I don't know, it's a bit more complex. I think it has both of those mixed together somehow. A lot of chemists don't actually know. But yeah, as you can tell, there's a whole heap of stuff going on in coffee. It's really complicated. And everything we do in processing, everything we do in roasting, affects all of these tastes in different ways. And what I want to do right now is hand around an actual coffee. So now your palates are really warmed up, you might be able to get different levels of different things. So just using this as your reference, I want you to have a drink of this coffee. So pour yourself out a little bit. And just as a group, I want to talk about the different levels of sweetness, of saltiness, acidity, and of bitterness. And we're going to use this as our reference. So remembering bitterness is at the back, we get saltiness through the middle, we get acidity at the side, some people get it at the tip, and then sweetness is generally sort of a coating sensation that's around here. Some people get it just at the sides here as well. Back, so you're getting some of this side. Yes. I probably should have got you to taste this before we tried anything else as well. But what are some of the things we're getting here? Is there any sweetness? Kind of low in sweetness. So what's the most dominant characteristic out of this? It's got a little bit of bitterness. Yeah. So yeah, definitely getting, that's kind of like really present. So it has some of those drying characteristics, and there's some stuff at the back as well, so a little phenolic. You get any acidity off this coffee? So when you put it in your mouth, is there any acidity at all? Yeah. So it's kind of bright, it's definitely like tingling around the sides. Sweetness, that's pretty interesting. So it's definitely not balanced, but I think there's some sweetness there as well. It just happens to be a little bit more dominated by this side. So,
On the downturn of the tasting, so bitterness and acidity first, and then there's this sort of sweetness and shock.
gotcha. Alright, so we're getting that intensity at first, and then it kind of drops off, and there's a little bit of lingering sweetness and bitterness. So I think that's all kind of spot on. So there's some of this, but it's a little bit of a lower level than this guy is. So, well, this is great. This is kind of the first starting point with any coffee. And all we do for this one next time is make sure we don't extract it so much. And we get lower levels of that, slightly higher levels of this. But what you guys have just done is be pretty objective. And can you all agree on that analysis of this coffee, that it probably isn't spot on, isn't really good? Awesome. That's a good place to be, because we're about to do that to 5 other coffees in a couple of minutes. So what I want you guys to do before we move on to that, just to wrap things up, do you mind if I borrow your little sheet just here? That is the most difficult one. Very good. So some things we've just gone through so far, I guess just generally flavour and aftertaste. These are actually components we discussed, like whether we thought it was positive or negative in terms of how sweet it was, whether it was floral or fruity, or whether it had things that were like medicinal, or maybe it tasted like mushrooms. That would be an example of bag quality flavour. Aftertaste is literally like whether it's lingering and whether it's pleasant or not. So for example, that coffee there, we wouldn't score too well in aftertaste because it lingers on the back of the palate. It's a little bit drying as well. It's not really fantastic. As far as acidity goes, really we just want to be able to say the quantity of it. So you've got this intensity marker just here. We can say whether it's high in acidity or low in acidity. And just for your reference point there, that one was sort of like medium to high. So they actually had quite a lot of acidity to it. What would you say the quality of that acidity was? Was it sour or was it kind of snappy? Sour. I think it was okay. Like I'd say that was cutting through okay without really being that sour. It was really had a little bit of sweetness to it, so it was really well supported. But we'll kind of cover a lot of that stuff on the cupping table. But roughly out of 10, I'd say we'll be giving that sort of a 7.5. And then the body of that, again, we've got intensity. So this would be kind of like a medium body. But as far as the depth of flavour went, that was quite rich. There's a lot of stuff going on. And it was quite pleasant and complex, so we'd say that it scored pretty high. And then balance would actually score pretty low, so that one was dominated by bitterness, whereas we'd want to bring everything into a bit more harmony there. And then overall, that's kind of up to you what you score it. Usually, if you just kind of enjoyed something and it was pleasant, 7.25 is kind of like the neutral place to be. If you didn't like it, you'd go a little bit lower. So before we move on and cut, I just want to quickly cover fragrance and aroma. And what I want you guys to do, if you can just grab all those paper cups, empty the liquid into your split cup. You're going to pack those away, so just stack everything for me. Awesome. That's okay, just stack. Alright, I'm going to give you these to share. Take one of those. Just take one of those. Vibes indeed. Alright guys, so the next thing we're going to do is work on our sense of smell. So this is a critical part of evaluating coffee as well, and of course taste is really just one side of it. When we're analysing the flavour of coffee, really we're commenting on how well the taste and the aroma work together. Now, what these kits are is a series of 36 vials, and they all have a different aroma, and that's associated with what we find in coffee generally. And it's actually pretty limited, so this isn't all-encompassing. It's actually not super inclusive of everything we get from coffee, but it's got enough to it for us to, as a group, smell different things and then kind of agree roughly whether something's fruity or whether it's smelling like chocolate, etc., etc. So what I want you guys to do, using these little books, these are kind of like the manual to the whole thing. You want to find this page, which is the key. It tells you what everything is. And what I'd like you to do as pairs, or I'll put you guys in a group of 3, is just to pull out one vial. And I want you to give it a shake with the lid on. And then you take the lid off. You have a smell of both sides and put the lid back on and hand it to someone else. So you guys have a smell of that. And then just as a pair, what I want you to do is smell it. And then without looking at the key, just roughly talk about whether it's sweet smelling or whether you think it's something specific. So for you guys, what do you guys think that smells like? So guys, we just...
Are we doing... Are we all doing it together?
Just hold off for 2 seconds. So I just want to kind of show you guys roughly how this should work. So it smells like shampoo. So do you think it's sweet, savoury, floral, maybe fruity? Yeah. So I reckon that's apricots. That's pretty nice. Maybe, I don't know. I've done this kit a lot. But so this one's smelling really fruity, really flowery. Now I've said that, it's probably going to smell exactly like it. What's the number on that one? 16. Apricot. Cool. Boom. How do you like that? So, I'll give you a smell.
Yeah.
So guys, I want you to work through the same thing. I'm going to give you about 10 or 15 minutes just to do this. Have a bit of fun.
Let's get
Sour.
Somebody, yeah, because it's like lavender.
Strong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I think it's
It's kind of nutty.
Yeah.
So the best thing for you guys to do is without discussing it, smell, and then afterwards, because you really shape each other's opinion as you go along.
It smells like a lemon
It smells nuts.
Yeah.
So
Probably wrong. I have a cold.
when you pass this from person to person, do this, and then you get a really good impression. Use the lid as well. Smell both sides.
Very good.
Yeah.
Vanilla.
So that's like a, is it either floral or pulp?
Your coffee.
Coffee pulp, yeah. So it's like kind of like fruity, kind of floral at the same time. Well, once you've used them, I reckon keep them out for a while, just so you can revisit them.
Yeah.
So guys, once you've been doing this for a while, I'm going to pull one vial out and test you all and see how accurate
When you smell the first you should have coffee in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Or we just get some coffee.
No, I'm asking for when you're sniffing coffee, do you have something that you do in between to break your smoke?
Do you also listen
Pretty
to
ridiculous, right?
Why do they use coffee?
Yeah, passage. So you way to reset things.
Yeah, that's good.
Oh yeah, we need that. Yeah, it's good.
Maple syrup.
What? Yeah.
It's like we both not honestly.
Is it
Yeah,
maple?
it's pretty crazy, isn't it?
Delicious. Yeah.
Coriander seeds, yeah.
What did you say?
This is like, you know,
It's
cereal, but not from the chocolate factory.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's just like,
Yeah, it's like a.
it's like a kind of.
I'm gonna give this to you guys.
Recipes?
I'm gonna give a little bit. Have you guys seen this before? This is totally, you've seen that. Beautiful. Have you ever used this one? Actually, I'll leave this here. You can always use it.
Yeah, now it's
Yeah, we're gonna wheel it. Wow, that's.
So this thing is awesome to use for these purposes, what we're doing right now. So you really just want to stick to this part to start with. But what it helps you do is really roughly classify something. And as people that are evaluating coffee, at a bare minimum, you at least want to be falling together in one of these categories. So when I hand around one vial for you all later, I want everyone to tell me whether they think it's one of these. And then the further you go on this wheel, the more specific things become. So this is a really much better place to be. So if you can all agree that something is floral, if you can all agree something smells like citrus, or it smells Allisushis. This is what I want you guys to do. So before you discuss it, smell the same vial, and then see if you can at least agree on which category it's in before you look at it. Then these are the really specific vials around the edge, and some of them are on the sides. Use that for a little while. So you get number one.
That one's amazing.
Honey or maple syrup. So you're probably pretty close. I reckon you're in that category at least, sugar browning. So these are the things we usually get as a result of
That's very
roasting.
sweet. What's this syrup, Patty?
So you're pretty close. So you reckon it's close to that. No, that's it's actually vanilla. But this is actually a good sign. So you guys are actually hitting the same sort of marks. This is within sugar browning.
What number is that?
It's pretty close to caramel. It's pretty close to chocolate as well. You're in the right sort of category. So you actually got the right subcategory there, and you're not too far away. So keep going. Keep doing that. It certainly is.
Funny how once you.
This is the first part of calibrating a whole bunch of people, is that you'll start interpreting things different ways, and then suddenly your interpretation matches whatever the target
It
is.
smells like earth.
It could be earth.
Yeah, it smells like earth.
Don't like to get back.
Oh, this
How do you find these? Do they smell like
taste smells like
Once I read them, then I can. Yeah, that's right.
that is vodka. Vodka. They have alcohol base, so some of them are going to smell. Yeah, just like yeah. Some of the
Oh, it's good.
so what you guys should do, if you think it's smells like something else
Yeah, it
before,
smells like earth.
then that's just going to train you to recognize what it actually is. Next time
Like
you smell it.
snakes. I guess.
That's right. Whenever I say gin tonic in here, it's cucumber. Kind of the same.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Well, yeah, that's it. Well, that's kind of like where my sensory memory lies. But that's what you guys have to do as well. Then as a group, like you all might be like, that reminds me of apricots, that reminds me of peaches, that reminds me of some other random fruit. But you know, if it's all comes into that general fruity category, that's a good thing. Because then you're all describing coffee.
Yeah, the apricot, we both thought it's like raspberry.
It smells like, yeah.
Well, that's good.
It smells like, yeah, when you're.
So you can at least agree, like, when we start using this chart,
Starchy, yeah, that's the word.
this is a way for us to get very specific as well. So like apricot generally fits under like very like fruity. So you both agreed to send that was free. That's about as far as you really need to go. And then there's the specific part after. And that's going to be carried away sometimes. So if we keep it,
Yeah, I never
Really?
When I say realize it's black.
I feel like maple syrup and
Yeah.
walnut kind of the same category. Like they're kind of. I did maple syrup and walnut.
maple syrup.
Walnuts?
So that'll all be,
No.
so all the sugar granulates, you guys are happy.
So we definitely said maple syrup.
Oh my god, that smells amazing.
But it's actually walnuts.
Yeah.
So too far away.
It's not as extreme as caramel. I feel like I can smell it. It's so delicious caramel.
Or maple walnut.
So much sweetness.
It does smell like caramel.
Caramel.
I like the red
I
one.
wonder if it's smell.
What is it? Oh, no, what do you choose?
Oh, I think it's
No, it's better. It's toast.
That
That doesn't smell like toast.
No, that's the thing, and that's really common in this field. Like, it's really rare you smell like, oh yeah, that's actually
Can
what.
somebody get 31? I want to smell what I think.
Yeah, no, we have a little bit like cooked beer.
Smells like.
This one here is smoke.
Yeah, this one kind of smells like smoke.
Yeah.
You like,
These ones have
yeah,
like
you can. I feel like, oh, that's funny.
So I don't like smoke.
Yeah, actually, no, that's
Yeah.
Is that beef?
Oh,
That's so nice.
you shouldn't have said.
Yeah, that's beef.
So if you don't know what that is, travel up this way a bit. So that's medicinal, turpentine. So these are the things that these aren't very good. Medicinal, that's pretty much it. So might smell like rubber, might smell
It's honey.
yeah. What's another medicinal thing? Like betadine. What was it? It was medicinal.
Hickory.
Yeah,
That has
let's say,
very vague medicinal.
Oh,
It's disinfectant.
see if you can pick this one.
I want to like eat some of this.
No, the numbers on the bottom.
I really want to smell.
I can't, it's just a broad category. But
Ah,
I'll do it blind first, alright.
I didn't guess that. I actually looked.
Yeah.
it's pretty good one. How do you get that flavor? That's
You
actually
We may do that. Oh,
Hey,
how do
I
I?
think you can extract that.
Oh man.
I just think about
It's that from like,
Oh,
if you haven't
smells
cleaned
like
your
booze and it
in a little while, you like rancid coffee.
It's like a lot of beef jerky.
Like if we left those water filters
That's bizarre.
on all day, then
Yeah, like
this
beef jerky,
would be a
yeah.
savoury character.
Which one did you want?
And like really hardcore ristretto shots that are over extracted have a real savoury character.
something in the like
It's just brown chocolate. Produces chicken.
I wish.
You'll be good. Smoky
Is
chocolate.
this, are these good ones? Or is this the fault?
So these are shells.
Smoky toast chocolate. Smoky toast.
So this has to do with like the cleanliness of the ground. So these would rest differently than anything else. So if you imagine, yeah, because it's smaller. So this is just bad for us because it reduces consistency. So that might create some of these resins over here. You get like cashew, burnt, tari, really dark rest quality. Whereas the rest of the rest might taste like really great sugar grain stuff.
You know when
It's
you
actually
get
amazing when that actually smells.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is
The,
that
no, I don't like that.
so check.
Yeah,
So that's like silver skin. Yeah. So remember we looked at all those layers and you had parchment.
No, I
So if you
don't
take
know.
the parchment off, there's another layer there, and it's really tight around the seed.
butter.
As the coffee expands during roasting, it just comes off.
So it's not that it hasn't been.
Yeah. Really? It's like my favorite
It's pretty
food.
good. Yeah, we can't really get rid of it because when you dry the coffee out, it's just there.
I feel like it's strong
It smells good.
Do you decide all?
We've had pepper.
You decide all in the process,
They've not got-
like whether it's going to be
Oh,
dry or
yeah.
like, can you tell the farmer how to wash it?
We could, yeah, if we went to a farm, like we would buy blue
But
coffee.
clothes need to
We
taste
want
like.
you to try processing this way, and
I
then
know,
why
it
don't we
needs
want to do
taste.
it?
Smells strong.
So you don't go like, oh, this coffee's
Yeah.
like that and you want to bring out this thing, so
It's kind of our place.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's a lot.
yeah, it's kind of like that. Like we could, and there's definitely people doing that. That's
Oh,
so
it
different. I
does.
mean, you just got to be careful going to another
Oh.
place where you could possibly have influence over someone's livelihood and then going, hey, you should do this. But then that's
If yours telling in the next 5 years, well, then
Apricot,
well, that's okay.
which one did you say?
Anything's possible. Yeah, we don't
Did you
offer
say
it.
what's on?
But it's
It's
much
coffee.
better than
It's coffee, but it's so
So you got the same coffee, like natural.
Yeah, that's right. That's
natural.
big.
I reckon it
smells
like
I
can't
until you actually get in the bean, like it's like 20 different processes.
Exactly right. So all you can really do is buy us on the cup coffee. That's what we do. We go around and try like 200 coffees in one trip. And then out of that, we might buy like, I don't know, we might buy a large lot of one. And then we might have some really small lots that are really great. We buy that too. And just sell it at different micro lots. Or same as at the micro lots. Yeah, so like that we're in the program.
making me hungry.
The things we'll be cupping over there are all like really small lots of coffee. So guys, I'm just going to pinch this so these guys can use it as well. That's
The meat.
so check this out. Have you seen your kick? Well, this is a way for us to, as a group, calibrate and find one of these broad categories that at least we agree something similar. So for a group of couples, this is great because, like I said, if one person's saying apricots, one person's saying strawberries, one person's saying blueberries, we can really agree that that falls under a fruit category. And then we can get specific. We might agree that it's more berry-like. And then here we've got some really specific things that chart covers that coffee couldn't smell like. But depending on the culture, that's going to be different. And this is just one example of a whole group of things that people might want to agree on. So what I'm going to do with you guys shortly is pass one violator. And I want you to tell me roughly where it sits within this first one. And then it's a bonus if you can get it in one of these outer ones and get it specific. So use this for a little while. What I want you to do is smell it blind. And then with your partner, see if you know which one of those categories it sits in. And so this is taste. It's kind of the same idea for sour, sweet, salt. And this is all the different aromas we get from problems with coffee. So if we had a defect, this kind of helps us if we smell it. So for example, if something is a little black pop, usually you can track that down to the way the coffee's been roasted. So you see it tips, cereal-like, biscuity, skunky.
It's kind of like going through the perfume.
So that's the purpose of this guy. Some of these things are good, like anything that's aged, or anytime the coffee's been degraded for whatever reason, we get really specific flavour notes from that. So yeah, have a crack at that. See
Tobacco. Tobacco is very
Yeah, now you're saying nutty, I feel like it's more nutty. It's somewhere down here, I'd say.
How you guys going? Where's my rubber?
Nutty, malty.
Everything's starting to smell.
I don't know. It's definitely not the fruity part. It's more the low.
Not really.
Yeah.
It does have like kind of like.
Oh, I don't know why I wanted to smell that.
I think I know what that one is. How'd you go with 32 before?
What was that? Oh, is that smoke?
Roasted peanuts.
Yeah, it's like a campfire.
I reckon a combination of that.
I want to get this.
Awesome.
Yeah, I reckon it was kind of like.
Yeah.
I felt like it was there, but it was virgin. It wasn't like totally. Yeah, it tasted. It smelled like everything.
Hey, you're going coffee.
I think that's Tennessee.
I know they all went into one now.
Cool.
Yeah.
You want to go back?
That smells like my grandma.
Nice.
I
I always get up, then you get tea rose or you get coffee blossom. It's like my grandma's more like.
It smells like food.
Yeah, it smells awesome.
It just smells
How you guys going? Any success in calibrating?
Oh, you'll get it.
Oh yeah. I mean, whether you get it right is one thing, but you at least agreeing roughly where something sits. Yeah. Okay, that's good.
Well, what's his name?
Yeah.
I think it's
Yeah, that was.
Yeah.
what is it?
That's how that
Like
works.
some herbiness, maybe?
Oh, really?
I don't know, it's like a metal.
Gross. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
After getting wet.
I think I know what that is. What did you guys say? It's like a herby something? I think. Yeah, it's actually a really confusing one.
What number is it?
I think it smells like copper chocolates. Remember those Russian? That's what I just got. Is it shaking for?
Roasted coffee.
Yeah. But it doesn't really smell like roasted coffee. There's a lot of stuff getting wet and it's a little bit old. It smells like
Yeah.
sweet.
Where would that go on?
I think that's probably
Sugar brand. Or just the whole chart.
It doesn't smell. To me, it doesn't
Are
smell.
you doing with the lid as well?
That's Mardi Gras.
Not sharp.
Light it up and then. So before you smell it, give it a shake and then smell both sides. It's actually pretty hard that one. But you know what next
That
one.
coffee when it's roasted, you mean? Like
Yeah.
as the aromas that come out of roast?
I think so, yeah.
Not to me, anyway.
Yeah.
Not terrible. Just I can never.
It smells like a dark.
It smells good.
Oh, this one is so
What is it? I don't know.
The biggest pregnant.
Alright guys,
Some nuts.
that's pretty close.
Am I close?
Yeah, I think pretty close. That'll be on the sugar grading part as well. And it's kind of nutty. Yeah.
But it's not a nut.
No, I think it is. Yeah.
I think there's like all nuts are the same.
Yeah, well, it's an almond or
The almonds, yeah, it's a hazelnut. The almonds dark.
Smell like that, and you lay on the floor and you get hands.
Yeah, it smells like Nutella. But you see how I've always got something else goes into it. So for me to recall this, so if you guys had enough time to practice this, you could get really good at doing it. And this is the thing that's directly applicable in a cup. Is I have a whole bunch of people smelling and going, oh, what does it smell like? But once you practice with this for a little while, you're like, ah, sweet, fruit. Oh, sweet, it smells like.
Well, you can't be compared to tasting that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So
And you
that's
guys normally the same?
pretty close. Yeah, if we haven't done it together in a while, it goes definitely with scoring, but with smelling and analysing, most people roughly get the same stuff. Pretty close. So guys, I'm going to test you now. I'm just going to choose a really decent one. It's not really a test.
You will get fired. You will be fired if you don't pass.
Yes, okay. Now I'm going to, this is kind of a crappy one. I'll give you that one last, to be honest.
I don't know.
That's a hard one. Too hard. So I'm just thinking of a really hard one. Okay. I'll pass this one around. Right, so have a smell of that. Without, don't talk about it until everyone's had a smell. And I want to roughly know everything here. Put both up to your nose. That's a cruel one, I think. It's pretty specific sort of smell. It's hard. Yeah, it is. So if you could rack these aroma bombs up. Alright, speed it up guys.
That's what I was thinking.
What's one of the first impressions?
Oh, yeah, we've done this one. I know exactly what it is.
Yes.
I'm pretty confident.
But if you get about live for like 30 seconds.
I was like, super laugh. I always just laugh.
So look,
Yeah, but it's over so quickly. You're 1 second Irish, 4 spouse.
with the Irish,
I think
the famines.
Yeah.
This is probably a bad one to start with. That's a very specific, crappy smell. So if you ever get this from coffee, it's actually due to a defect that we don't really know too much about. I'll tell you after you can smell it, what it's called. But you often find this in like African countries, and it's a product of coffee borers. So these little pests that actually drill into the coffee. So it's super hard to spot when you're sorting coffee out, and it kind of sneaks in. So you might, it's also really inconsistent. So one lot of coffee might have a couple of seeds in it that have this really specific aroma, and then the rest of it's fine. You can smell it. Now, what do you think that smells like?
Potatoes.
Potatoes. Yes?
I thought it was me.
And you thought it was, did you think it was, is that, who, hands up, thought it was potato? Oh, that's pretty good. Pretty good. I really say that's a savoury element there, right? So that's good. At least we're all on the same page. So this one's a little bit more challenging. So have a really quick smell that will pass along. So for this one, I just want you to name the broad category in which this fits. So whether you think it's fruity or savoury, whether you think it smells like one of these things just here. So flowery, fruity, herby, nutty, caramelly, chocolatey, resinous, spicy, or carbonic. Those things.
Sure.
That's right. Maybe we're supposed to everyone else's smell.
Like a school run. I just have that in a book.
No, I've made mine what I thought it was.
That's right. If you know the specific thing, it's good. It's a good sign.
Sweet.
Okay. What of these would you say that fits under?
To me, it smells citrusy.
It's more like a, yep. Who hands up? You thought it was citrus?
Not flowery.
Thought floral. Alright, so we're kind of around the same category. This is good. So we're either flowery or fruity at the moment. But everyone's leaning towards citrus. So what would you say out of lemon and apple? Lemon? Yeah, you'd be right. So that was lemon.
It was.
It was lemon.
It didn't say coffee blossom or something?
No.
Ah.
You've really got to breathe it in though to get the lemon, I find.
Yeah, for sure. So that's good. So it sounds like you're all pretty much calibrated, and that's about as hard as like analysing coffee gets. It's really just a bit of practice. This is a really valuable training tool that you just don't really find anywhere. But if you ever want to get more into this, like the side of analysing it, you just got to hit cuppings and really spend time actually thinking about coffee as you're drinking it. And don't be too tempted to waffle on about the various intricacies of coffee. We really just want to stick to those really outlying broad categories when we're describing, especially with customers. We were kind of saying before that those really specific examples of what it should taste like saying a coffee tastes like apricots. There's a little bit of danger in that, because when you serve it to a customer, that stuff is more of a nuance. It's not really like the most apparent thing. But describing something as like citric or floral or fruity, those are really broad, easy to interpret categories, and that's kind of what we want to stick with our customers as well. Now guys, what we're going to finish off with today is a preparation and tasting of a whole bunch of different coffees here in a traditional cupping format. So again, I'm going to give you a really quick break, and then we're going to reassemble over there. So just bring everything you need to bring with you, including your clipboards. Okay guys, once you've got your 3 samples, what I want you to do is bring all 3 cups over to me. I'm going to grind them for you, and then I want you to take them back to the same spot again on the table. Have you got 3? Yeah. 3? Yeah, take them all.
Read the different. Read it from each one. You already read it.
So no, we're just going to have two cups to taste from.
Oh, I get it.
They're actually the same. Yeah, so these are manufactured by These are slightly like this. That's pretty much it. The design profile is really good. That little fine. That's what I'm really really
Oh no, there's two burger plates.
There's a hot burger in the city.
Oh no, they're great.
Something, and then I was like, oh wait,
These are
it's
titanium,
like,
really sharp,
yeah, I remember. It's like,
Oh, really?
oh no, it's just like,
But
So
these
like
are
in the
you were right. We recommend this. Yeah, that's like a
Parasite. Oh boy.
Alright guys, so the first part of what we're going to do today is walk around and just have a smell of all these coffees. And I want you to do so with your clipboard. And we're actually going to today at least put some notes down for each coffee so we can talk about them after. So what you'll notice is that you have on your bag a label with something really, really specific on it. Usually it will have a farm name or a farm name, and then it has the country of origin as well. Sometimes it has the region too. What I want you guys to do is go around and under sample 1 of the sample number part, I just want you to write the coffee names that we've got here on the table. You guys have Sidama. Yeah. So it's actually, the coffee's called Adi and it's from Sidama in Ethiopia.
What's it
It's a region. Yeah, it's a big region.
So like, lots of people have this
Yeah.
So are they all fun?
Well, this is, remember that situation I was saying about Ethiopia with the ECS?
Ah, that's right.
Yeah, so
This is like broken.
yeah, there's brokers. Yeah, so I mean, this is a little bit different as coffee. Like we know a bit more about it because the people who bought it off sold it to these guys, and then knew somehow which coffee was theirs, and they bought it. So we have a relationship with the guys who farm it, but it's actually
What happens if they cut out?
it's illegal. They can't do it.
Cheering back.
But there's still kind of work on issues around that. But once it comes from the trace, it will be a better system. But this coffee here, it's actually pretty amazing. It's from this series of mountains, and it's like between 1,500 and 1,750 meters. There's a group of farmers there, and this is like coffee picked at a very large volume harvest. So it's like really ripe, it's not like the pellet. And then it's naturally processed. And the trees it comes off are like varietals we just don't know about, they're not classified, they're all heirloom. So it's pretty amazing.
So is that like the way to lose?
I know you don't have to do this. I've thought about it.
It has an effect. It has a different effect. So like with these ones, it's the most significant, it's most ripe, it's most evenly ripe. So it's really consistent. It's a natural process. So they kind of need that consistency to make it work. But yeah, it's crap. So guys, sorry.
That's all.
There's 5 coffees altogether. So guys, once you've written down what the coffees are, what I want you to do is walk around to the samples and just hold a whole sample set to yourself for about 30 seconds. I want you to pick the cups up just like this, shake them around, and have a really good smell. And then what I want you to do is write down just one broad category off that flavour wheel that you think it smells like for each coffee. Yeah, maybe we'll stick to the longer reviews today. So something so.
Yes.
So don't take too much time, guys. Just the first thing that pops in your head. If you can't get anything off it, just write nothing.
Oh, do you just want us to give us the quality, or do you want us to write?
I just want you to write one little note under the quality section. So you see you've got 2 lines in the quality bit. So in one of those, just write the first thing that pops in your head when you smell a coffee.
Where's quality?
So you're looking at fragrance and aroma. So see these 2 lines. So write something up the top there that it reminds you of. And guys, so I want you to do this for all the coffees. So just try to do it in about 30 seconds per coffee, and then rotate around.
Are we using this one?
Yeah. Some of them are going to be more than others, that's for sure. Yeah, there's not much. You can smell it when it's grinding. It's like well, this one right now is just smelling like coming on. There's not too much going on. It's really like flat. But that's okay. That's just the information that we want to provide. So just be honest, guys. If you can't smell anything, that's okay as well. Just make a note for yourself. So this is just the first part of analysing aroma. Yeah, try not to get these mixed up, guys. Make sure you know what's what. So let's keep the arty down this side. So is that this one as well?
So this is ready.
There's 3. Oh.
So there should be two cups of arty. You've got 3 coffee. Okay guys, I'll just give you 1 more minute. Make sure you've got around to every coffee so far. So one little note down.
I think that's the color, yeah.
Don't stress if you can't get it. Is anyone struggling with this?
Yes.
Alright. Okay.
worth of coffee. So guys, I'm going to lay some water out on the table for you. So let's take those together.
That's done.
Okay guys, if you just gather around this table just for a moment, I'm just going to show you the rest of the procedure. Yeah, good. That should have a pretty pungent, fruity aroma. Did anyone get fruity? Yeah.
What one was it?
It's the Sidama.
Yeah.
What do you prefer? This one?
Caramel.
Caramel? Is that like sweeter smelling? Maybe.
I got like pretty mild.
No, I got
Maybe like a savoury?
Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes when you get off coffee is occasionally that beefy characteristic as well, especially in the dry grounds. Like there's an absence of other aromas. That's what you kind of get sometimes. But this one, yeah, it's kind of sweet. Now guys, the next part of this process, what we do in cupping is start a timer. Oh, we need a working timer. Everyone just here. And we very unceremoniously pour the water on. So the idea is that once that timer started, we just get all the grounds and the coffee brewing ASAP. And then what I'll ask you guys to do, if you just hit the table, just avoid bumping it or knocking it in any way. Alright, so that's the brewing process started. So I'll pass that around and I'll get you guys to fill up those and then we'll fill up these guys. And then over that side, you've actually got a jug there. So if you want to start the timer that's on that table, there is one. Have you got a timer there? So start that timer, we'll pour the water up. Make sure you fill it right to the top. What temp's the water? Yes. Yeah. So one we pour it is probably like 9.4. Yeah.
And is that like a set measure, like that amount of water to coffee, or doesn't matter?
It is. Yeah, absolutely. So it's 8.25 grams to 150 mils. So with the volume it is about, yeah, that's right. How long are you working for? So we're gonna wait till somewhere between 3 and 5 minutes, and then we'll go to the next part, which is the break. So what I want you guys to do for the time being, let's grab yourself one of these cups just here off your table. It's going to be your spittoon. Grab yourself a spoon as well. You guys have yourself a spoon. Very good. Now what I'd like to do is take anything off these tables. So let's just take all of our clipboards, all of those play wheels, just put them somewhere else. And all of the scales can come off the table as well. That is okay, guys. What time have we got? Yeah, this one's set to scales. 2:55. Alright guys, so let me get you to, just to gather around here, I'll show you the next part of what we're going to do. So these ones are kind of broken by themselves, so if we knock it, or in this case the coffee's a little bit old so it doesn't have too much gas, what's going to happen is the samples are going to sink prematurely. But generally with the cupping, what we want to do is scrape away that top layer and get a big waft of the steam that comes off. So usually you take a whole set for yourself, and what you do is push this away 3 times while your face is really close and you smell it. So obviously watch your nose, don't stick your nose in coffee, happens all the time. And we just do this.
And this is the time where you get a lot of aroma off all the coffees. So there should be something there. And this is the point where I want you to write on that second column. And then if you like it, I want you to give it a high score. If you don't like it, I want you to give it a lowish score. Okay? And that's probably about as complicated as we'll go with scoring today. So this table is ready. Once that table says somewhere between 3 and 5 minutes, then you're ready to go again. Yeah, good luck. So you're rinsing your spoons in between if you move into a different cup.
Is this just with fragrance and aroma?
It is, yeah. So fragrance will be the dry hands, aroma is the fruit.
What's this cup?
Spinning out. That's not whatever you get, just write it down. So this is really good, guys. So it's great to have this like pretty silent environment, and it's good to have you guys just by yourselves, trying to be really objective, try to write down your own thoughts, because at the end when we talk about these coffees, that'll give you something to say. Like when I ask you, what did this smell like, what did it taste like, did you like it? You should have some notes down so we can talk about it together.
Is this party? Yeah.
How'd you all go, guys? Have you had a chance to write down something about that brewed aroma yet? It's okay, no stress. So guys, the next part of this is cleaning these coffees up in preparation for tasting. So let me draw your attention here just for a moment. The way we do this is using 2 spoons. You put them sideways just like this, and then move from the back of the cup around to the front. And then you kind of tilt it at the end, and that lets you get most of the stuff that's floating around on the top. That isn't what we want to taste. We actually just want to taste the brew itself. So what I want you guys to do, when you've finished evaluating the aroma, is take all that stuff off. And then at about the 10-minute mark, what we're going to do is start slurping these coffees and just writing down some notes there. Don't get too stressed out around this. Obviously, it's a really detailed procedure, scoring and stuff. If you want to have a go at it, go for it. But at least write down your thoughts for each coffee after you've tasted it, and that'll be enough at the end just to talk about what you liked, what you didn't like, acidity, body, all those sort of things as well. So guys, if I can get you to do that, so really all you do is skim like this, you rinse that into your spittoon, and then you rinse those spoons out and move on to the next one.
You can, that'll be fine. Finish cleaning up the coffee, just chuck the rinse water in that bucket and then fill it up with some fresh stuff.
So guys, any of those extra spoons, just want to check. You guys got an extra? So keep one for those. Very good. Okay, doing well so far. Just underneath there. So.
Is that Katie?
Yeah.
Will we just do this?
That's right. As long as you get rid of most of them.
Do it.
Yeah, that's good. Alright guys. So the last part. So now we can finally start tasting these guys. What I want you guys to do is just try to keep to one person at a time per sample. So just to give yourself enough time to taste it. Just be respectful of other people tasting as well, and try not to take too long with this. Just have a slurp and kind of move on, because what we're going to do is multiple passes. I want to try to get it so we're moving kind of like around in a big circle. And what I want you to do is go up to the coffee sample, get a little bit of on your spoon, so probably about half a spoonful, and slurp it back just like this. And after you've tasted it, so get it all over your whole tongue, and that slurping helps to atomise the liquid and get it up into your nose, gives you a really good impression of the flavour, and then spit it out into your spittoon. Otherwise you're going to get really high off caffeine. Okay, we don't want that. So taste both of the cups. The reason you've got two samples here is in case one didn't brew correctly. Have a slurp, write something down and move on, and then once these have cooled down, we'll do it again. That's it. It's got a function.
No, you're right here.
Almost put it in. Say it's got a good body. No? Like very good body.
Don't do.
What did you do? What else?
So that's good. I sort of
Just big coffee.
Where it's like a complete contrast to this.
You can do it, it's fine.
Just over there. That's
Does that mean leave the left?
so it would be like power.
Just tape it.
Whereas this one's like smooth.
That one's just not as intense.
And that one's really fruity as a result of that acidity too. So
Yeah, this one's not good, right?
this one's maybe the chocolate, maybe a little bit fruity. There's a little bit of fruit going on. It's got some acidity as well. It's not like flat. But it's got, yeah, it's got that body to it. Like definitely on the finish, that's where that chocolate caramel, where those sweet.
So what do you want to do?
Just anything you feel like. If you actually want to go along and do category by category, you're more than welcome.
So how do you have
It's written down
Let's
every
start
essay.
with the watery. So we were so you might want to score the same things. So you put, yeah, you put a score up there. The intensity of it, this is like how thick or how thin it is. So yeah, so you put this like medium to medium high.
What do you write?
Well, that isn't a score, it's just an indicator. And that's kind of justified. This is like a thicker body and a deeper sort of flavour. It results in a high score. So this is pretty good. That's what we're saying.
And acidity?
So acidity with this one, yeah, well we want to know how much acidity it has. So let's start with the level.
Is that not that acidic?
No, there's some acidity. So this is the classic.
There has to be some coffee.
There is, but you have the lower altitude coffees have a lot of acidity. So like a lot of Brazils, they're mainly grown at like 1,300, 1,500 meters.
But aren't they quite citrusy?
A really good one. Yeah, but like most Brazils are actually flatter and tropical, not so much acid.
So this would be on the low side.
Well, this is medium. This actually has a little bit of acidity.
So what were you scoring those? Like a 70?
Well, this is like how much you like it. When we're talking about how much to score it, I'm sure it's
It's hard for me to compare. I compare it as an espresso. I compare it to
Sure.
but I don't know what it's supposed to taste like.
Well, this, like, if we're just looking at it from a qualitative point of view, like a good quality acidity supports the sweetness of the coffee. And so this is enhancing the sweetness quite a bit. It's like a really lime, so
It's
it's
not
citrus.
sweet, it's
Yeah, well, but it's actually doing its job in the cup. Whereas like a winey or a sour characteristic is usually pretty poor quality.
yeah,
It's just called like balance. Yeah, the actual quality of the acidity is like low. Whereas this is high quality acidity. It's really slightly, it's like malic acid. So a little bit of citrus. It's like really good contrast. That's a good sign.
Thank you.
So now, with that in mind, yeah, try out some other coffees. See what you get. Compare the acidity of this one.
Maybe slightly higher. Why don't you it's too high?
No, it's actually pretty similar. You're right. Yeah, so this is just above the other one. In intensity. It's all right. It's actually quite a similar quality to the acidity as well. But this one lacks the body.
Yes, it's less body, but
I've never had coffee that was
it's like kind of brighter maybe.
Yeah, well, without that sort of support of lower notes, it's a little bit less complex.
I thought
So
it was
it
like
appears
the, yeah.
bright.
Well, why it's complex? Like how can it's just naturally grown? Like it's on.
Oh, this is just how I'm interpreting it.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's
Context of flavour.
Yeah. Absolutely. How you guys going? How good stuff? Have you tried these
Yeah,
designs already?
That one at the end is really nice.
You like this guy?
Yeah.
What do you think of this one?
I can't remember. That one's okay.
That one's like.
I quite like
Yeah, really acidic coffee as well and bright.
it. Does the acid of the coffee affect the way you acid milk?
Sure does.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially soy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's gonna, does it, you know that weird, does it do that with almond milk as well, like every
Oh, I don't know about almond milk. I don't know about almond milk. Find out.
So do you want higher acidity? Like if you
Probably the opposite. Probably want lower acidity.
no?
Yeah.
Because then there's like a balance of like.
You get curd.
No, but you could always.
Oh,
It's like a gray.
But
Especially if it's like.
we can kind of change the pH of coffee and the overall acidity depending on how you brew it as well. So if we had a really acidic coffee, we could brew it in a way that's a bit more suitable for milk or less suitable. So not really that lost with that. But I would definitely find some coffees that are more acidic than others. They don't behave too well with milk. Sorry, with soy milk, they just curdle it.
Also,
Oh, so it's not real milk.
because we use that one in that curdled still, so is that like considered
You've got some really fresh crop coffees in there. So yeah, it is considered to be
Yeah.
acidic coffee and changes pretty frequently as well.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember what's in it at the moment.
So this one you say high acidity, less body, yeah?
Yeah, well it's got kind of, it's the in-between body between those guys, but the more acidity than both of them. Yeah,
That's what you wrote
yeah,
down.
that's what you're down to. Yeah, cool, we calibrate.
That's awesome.
Alright, so you kind of see how this is kind of an objective process? Yeah. Super crazy. But after we've finished being objective, we can just talk about what we liked and what we didn't like. What do you guys think of this coffee?
I like
This one?
very blackberry.
Blackberry? Yeah, absolutely. It has definitely berry notes. What about the acidity of that compared to some of these others?
Oh,
It was low. It's low.
flavors.
It's
But,
good. Huh?
Yeah, I love it. I think the one thing about this coffee, it's got a little bit sort of a drying finish, and the roast date on this is really, really old. So I think we brewed it a little bit more than some of the other ones did. A little bit over extracted. But yeah, I guess by contrast, this guy is like really low in acidity, really high in sweetness, and this is the only natural on the table as well.
Yeah, it's a bit different.
Yeah, this is natural. So this is the Ethiopian coffee. It's from the Sidama region, and it's called Adi. And I was saying to these guys before, it's like really, really ripe fruit. It's all picked by hand, very, very selective. And it's from like the last pick of the season. So the last coffee that's left on the branch is what they use for this. It's all from heirloom varieties of coffee as well. So we don't really know what it is. We know it's Arabica, but we know it's not classified. So it's amazing. You get these really big, fruity, wonderful berry flavours from it, but without some of the acidity of these guys. So this is kind of like a massive contrast in coffee. This is a Kenyan. Kenyans are known to have like berry notes, but also a lot of acidity and chocolatey body as well. Is that kind of roughly what you guys were getting on coffee like that? What did it?
Wait, what'd you say? You said no, a lot of
Oh, a lot of acidity.
and
Yeah, so really high acidity. It's really malleable, so it's like an apple. Right, really snappy. Now guys, before we finish up, we've got about 10 more minutes. I reckon just have a quick fly around, have one more little taste of these coffees now they're cool. Unless you're done. Unless you're really cooked. But this is a really good time to jot down some notes about acid. When the coffee's hot, it's harder to analyse it, but it really comes out as it cools. So I guess like 7.25 would be your average. So if something's just okay, that's when you'd be like, alright, that's okay. It's not offensive,
so that's
it's not
not
amazing.
so you got high.
So 6 is like smacking it.
That's bad.
Yeah. But that's okay. Like that sort of stuff, that comes with that. Yeah, so 7.25. You guys should come to the cupping we're running. Yeah. So guys, we're running a cupping on the 2nd of July, which is a Cup of Excellence cupping. You're going to do that? Yeah, I'm your opening day. Don't come. Please don't come. Yeah, like that.
Where, here?
Here, yeah. So it's exactly the same format. The scoring is optional, but it's that thing I spoke about for Cup of Excellence. So we've got all the option ones here, and we're going to taste and potentially buy coffee if we like some of them. So if you subscribe to the newsletter before you go, we'll shoot you an invite so you can get on board.
That's cool.
It's a half cream. Yeah. Does that make any problems?
You can, yeah.
It's a little no, like a bar tab.
Yeah, so it's hard to get it like consistently. So I mean, we buy it. But occasionally it gets stuck. It gets stuck, so we're
No reshape.
yeah.
Today. Now.
It's hard. Sometimes like if you
No,
try
that's
this,
yeah, that's great.
shut it on it, I think something is right, you want to test it, it might go for weeks. So
If you could, I'd let you.
Like how often?
It's just like a
Or
reshape.
or
I feel like I'll show you the chart. So some coffees we buy enough that lasts for 9 minutes.
is that how long?
It's
What's the
actually
shelf life?
It's like 6 to 9 months.
Oh, yeah, you can like.
So we actually get through all this stuff before it gets to that point.
Yeah, you
Like
don't
just
take
like
breaks,
us,
you know, breaks is not.
we'd be
Yeah,
short
like
there.
Grace is just not convinced she's actually a fan.
But
She
then
looks
you
like
start
Julie
seeing
Andrews.
instant quality once it opens, so it takes a lot of age.
I'm dead ring after.
Which is okay if you're in Australia.
It's so true though, Amy.
Doing something else, like, you need fresh.
What's how you recommend to do like double Australians for your coffee? No?
Well done.
I think most drinks.
Yeah, I mean, that's true, yeah. They're like, what we're doing in training is.
So what do you do? Like, do you go like the one ratio?
So,
And then you can write
And
down.
then, so if you were going to recommend, like someone's going to ask me what's the best way to
yeah. Yeah, so I do so it's 20 gram VST baskets, 21 grams in. Honestly, so this kind of works out. 36 grams out, and then you got 26 to 29 seconds as your rough starting point. And that's kind of
That's fast.
It's faster. Yeah, it's not so short. And for milk coffees, like we'll push it higher and higher. As coffee is fresher, it should take longer and longer as well. But as a starting point,
So you brew it slower if it's younger.
yes, and faster if it's older.
I was still.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you remove content quickly as an age.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that one. That one's over extracted because it's a bit older. It's easy to take stuff out. So you don't need
Well,
as
we
much
tried
time.
to
Especially if you get really old coffee, I feel like if you extract it slowly, it doesn't taste over extracted at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you can do it either way. Yeah, that works as well. It's just different.
So we
That change with rice.
We're still using Chloe's
I
super
use
funny.
It's actually coffee. You need to know how to do both. Some coffees behave for 22 seconds. As opposed to it looks so quick. Yeah, it's really quick.
Yeah.
Once you start using weight, and in fact, again, you start looking at it, if it's taste, you start to see the difference.
Yeah, you're right. Because when you look at it, you're like, oh, that looks
Yeah,
awesome.
it tastes like- that's right. You're not afraid to push it into new territory if you're not looking at it.
Yeah.
But then again, like it works the opposite way. What you're saying, running really slow when it's age has the same sort of effects. You under extract, or you extract a lot less because it's coming through a lot slower. But the downside of that is usually you're stuck with a shorter shot. So if you want to keep it straight,
What if you put
Yeah, and it does it a lot.
like 60 mils in 34 seconds?
it's probably going to be able to extract
Texas
some better.
Queen.
But can out of 24, let's say you do 24 grams in a 20 gram basket.
I see
So
you.
you get 6 mils, a good 6
Mills kind of difficult to speak in.
What, 60
Oh, really?
grams?
Yeah.
Big difference.
She's
Yeah.
such
It
a
should be,
compliment.
what, 60 mils of coffee is not 60 grams?
No, the way it doesn't line up.
So I had this argument with someone and he was like, dead,
Let's
he's like
talk about this
100%.
spot where this is going to fuel some discussion. Let's wrap it up so you guys can get out of here. And then we'll do that. So, what do you think? How was today's session for you guys? Did you get a bit out of that in terms of knowledge tasting? Awesome. What was the favourite coffee? Who wants to call out their favourite? What do you guys at Farm like best?
I like that one.
Like this one?
Yeah, I liked that one over there.
This one?
Yeah.
Awesome. So, fans of acidity. Okay. Sweet. What about you guys? Which did you like?
I think that was very interesting, like how
The natural?
the berry flavours
Yeah.
I think it's quite, like, you don't get that in coffee.
Yep.
But no, I liked it more.
But you were more partial towards that natural.
It was the most interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. It's probably like out of all these is the contrast. So it has very little acidity, it's really fruit driven, whereas these are kind of snacky and fruit. What about yourself, Julie? What do you like? Such a dark horse. Sorry? Just a dark horse. It's like something completely different. What did you like about that the most?
It just had body.
Yeah.
Whereas I found the other set they didn't have as much body.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. And so
I quite liked this one. Initially I thought it was kind of rubbery, and then when it was colder and I had more of a chance to taste, check for acidity, it was sort of citric. And it's something like that.
okay, cool. Awesome.
What's your favourite one?
Ooh, well, like I did like that while it was hot, and I also like that one while it was really hot, but I was kind of leaning towards this guy over here, or maybe this guy over Yeah, and I think that's a really
Try all
balanced
of
coffee.
them?
Yeah, well, the thing I like the most about that is it's got a lot of stuff going on, but it's still really balanced. So yeah, I like it a lot. This one's kind of similar. Actually, I find them very, very similar, but it's got less body going on. But yeah, really, that's kind of a toss up for me between those. But I still, yeah, I don't know, I like all of them as well. Like that Natural is one of my favourite coffees. I just think we're using slightly older coffee today, sadly. Just didn't have any fresh stuff. Well guys, let's pretty much wrap it up. Hope you enjoyed that. What I'll get you to help you do is just clean these cups out and stack them. So I'll dump this in the middle. All you've got to do is give this a stir before you tip it in. And that'll make sure that all that coffee just goes straight into the mesh there. If you could stack these cups up here, and then I'll wash them. Yeah, so I think we got
It's just like everything we've heard. We're not, yeah, very good. But just hang around.
Yeah, when Douglas starts a chef, so he does it as well.
If I'm running 20 gram, I don't know, playing the other day, 21 and 20, just running it a bit quicker, you just lose a lot of money. I feel like you're going straight from the body you get.
Well, like, definitely, like, any good place like this, most of our customers doing much slower
So you're running it longer and you're actually getting more in terms of wanting to, what do you run for your builds?
So for milks, it's actually a little bit up in the air at the moment, but the shop time just gets pushed up, the dose doesn't really change. So you just end up getting more body from the fine grind than anything.
Alright, so then,
This is sick, yeah.
so to get
So I
extract,
thought then you're either over extracting that or under extracting your espressos, aren't you?
You'd think that, but it's not the case.
well, are you over extracting with that much?
Well, it's
Cut through the milk.
the slower you go, the more
I'm talking
disparity.
about the slowness, like the amount. Like if you're extracting,
I just want it.
yeah, that much are you over extracting?
I don't think it relates to extraction. It's not. Like, you can actually separate your extraction from your strength if you define those things really separately.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys. No worries. So, like, in a nutshell, right, once you bring in the brew ratios into the mix, if you're using 21 to 36, that's your strength right there.
Yeah.
The amount of time that takes, which is determined by your grind, then determines your extraction in your body that you get out. So if you take out like weight, dose and brew ratio,
So you do that the same every time.
that's right, yeah. So your strength never really changes. And that's kind of based on all the discussion on everything I'm saying right now is based on that stuff being the same.
Have you ever worked on a strata?
Yes.
So you guys are similar?
See,
So, like to get, so if you're working on 32, if we've like profiled it as 32 seconds, so like if you're adjusting, if you make it coarser, then you've got to up the dose in order to get the same amount of shot, no?
yeah, the strata's different because you're using standardized time, right? Yeah. So on SNESOs, we don't standardize the time, we standardize the quantity of water that you get out using volumetrics.
So the manual heads are
Or you're not doing it at all, and you have to roughly work out what it is. That's right. Or using scales.
Yeah, that's what.
So you
that's
brew
the best.
to like 7 seconds, you should have your first bit come out, then you.
Or you wait at the end, no?
You guys should definitely come do the training. Not that you need training, but
No, I
it
think-
explains everything
Yeah,
about what we do and where we're coming from
Yeah.
the ground up. So I think like with your knowledge, like already being really, really experienced, that stuff is just you just feel like sweet, you know everything. Absolutely.
No, I do it. So yeah, so when the guy that was telling me the 60 mils, he was saying in order to extract that much, like 7 seeds, I know now they go like 2 to 1 or whatever.
Yeah.
That they need better. You need better grinders because there's less fines in it or something.
It's
and then,
pretty interesting, like because you're going. Well, yeah, I mean, there's that, right? Mazas aren't the best for grind quality. They generate a lot of fines. And that's kind of, in my opinion, that's the biggest thing holding the industry back, is that we don't have a grinder like an EK43 that's more readily available. It has less fines and more solid grind profile. And I think like next 2 years we'll see that solved.
And this, that's not.
Well, that'll work the same way. That's just got a slightly different particle range than an EK43 does. It's more set up for filter coffee than it is for espresso.
So why don't they use
Or it
them
doesn't
in
matter.
cafes?
Some people do. Definitely.
So what would you suggest?
Man, ideal setup, like you want to have a grinder there to experiment with. So whether it's the DIN or whether it's an EK43. But then like to get the...
You guys are giving me a Coney.
Yep.
So you suggest them out of the grinders on the market at the
Are
moment.
you just using that as a single?
That's a
Is that for you single?
black.
Yeah.
Black.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of like the good things about Coney. The reason we recommend them is you get the same grind profile as a Mazza. Really, really consistent dose weight. So once it's set up, like because it takes a little bit more to grind than a Rover does, it's really consistent.
Yeah.
If you're getting
Oh, it's an E.
you getting E or you
Yeah.
yeah.
Coney. Yeah.
Look, besides that, like I'm saying, I think we'll change it up in the next 2 years. We'll have a new standard thing that we recommend. But the reality is that there's not a whole heap of great grinders in the market.
Well, there's one on the website. I don't know if it's a commercial one.
Is that the Forte?
It's all digital.
Yeah, that's a rocking grinder, man. It's kind of like great for filter, but you could use that as your single grinder, like a lot of people do. That's been used in the States for a while as a Vario. Remember the Vario grinder? So it's just away. So it just takes out the needing to program the time.
And is it better, like less fines and all? Like, is it better for extracting the shots?
It's a flat burr, so depending on your opinion of that, then yes or no. Well, like the theory on flat burr grinders is that they develop a better matrix in pre-infusion. So they swell up and they actually create a better bed, so you don't get fine migration as much. So despite the grind quality not being free of fines, it at least traps them and stops them from making a pool at the bottom.
How's that?
Okay, so when you get a grind from a Mazza, it's not perfect, right?
I assume it's not.
Yeah, it's not perfect. But the coarser you go, the better it is. So these are okay for running like 7C shots. You can actually get like good results because coarser grind, less fines, better flavour. So that they're actually okay in that regard.
So if we went now and put 24 grams
Yeah.
of your coffee like in the 20-gram basket and extract it our way, like don't you think, isn't that more optimal? Isn't it get more body and more flavour out of your coffee?
If that's what you want to do, yeah, it'll work.
But that's just not the flavour profile you're going for.
It's just not our starting point that we recommend. Look, honestly, like we recommend that to people sometimes. It depends what they want to get.
Yeah.
Like we don't think there's one like brilliant, all-defining way to make coffee. We just give people a recommended starting point if they really don't know what they're looking for. But by the sounds of it, you guys already know what you're looking for.
No, there's
Yeah.
just so many million
If you
different ways
let me
to
taste it,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know.
But the way that we recommend is a little bit different to what you guys are probably used to doing.
Yeah.
By the
Oh,
sounds
we
of it.
definitely won't do what we're used to doing.
Yeah.
So I think a mixture of both, huh?
Well, I guess like the other thing that works with our standard recipe is a really specific cup size, because you will lose strength from the dose that we're recommending if your cups are bigger than 150 mils. So if you're splitting shots, you should be able to split using our recipe into two 150 mil cups and get a good standard strength. If you're using bigger cups than that, we recommend double Strettos or something pretty similar. Probably like more like a 1 to 1.5.
So that's not a double show though, is it?
It's just on the cusp.
Yeah.
It's
So
just
what's
on the
that?
cusp, yeah.
One
So
to
it's-
1.5, is that the 21 to 36?
So it works out, if you look at a brew chart, it's on the edge of Normale and Ristretto. It's like right in between.
And then, but then don't you need, I don't drink milk, it sounds like I really can't, and they say that if you do a longer shot, it cuts through the milk better. That's
If you extract more, it cuts through the milk better. So
Yeah,
if you,
because you get the second half of the
Yeah.
bitterness and that's the stuff that cuts through.
well that's right, yeah. So,
So
like,
you don't, when you do like a ristretto,
yeah.
do you just pull it out while it's still extracting normally, or do you actually want the extraction to start blonding when you're pulling it out?
Yeah, probably more the second one.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Definitely, yeah.
Because that's the concept of it, is doing the same thing but slowing it down.
That's
at
right.
heat, isn't it?
So yeah, we look at it in terms of like extraction yield versus strength. So if you were going to do ristrettos, you would set your volumetrics up to only take out 1 to 1. Yeah, maybe slightly longer than that, like 1 to 1.5 max for a ristretto base.
Yeah.
And that what you get from that though, without pre-infusion, if you did use pre-infusion, is an extraction which is way more difficult to manage than the recipe that we're recommending people do. So like a lot of the numbers that we're giving people is based around shop behaviour and consistency, but there's definitely better results you can get than that if you're looking to do milk coffee or you're looking to get a standard recipe for milk. I would stray really far away from the standard recipe that we're recommending. Definitely.
So with the black stuff,
yeah,
because you're like whatever I choose, which I still don't know which blend I'm going to use,
right,
which is another thing we probably need to look at.
yeah.
But like that'll be just for black, so every long black, and then rotational singles and stuff like that. But probably the standard black or standard espresso will be that.
Gotcha.
How would you be pouring that?
That recipe that I gave you is what I'd recommend.
1:25.
Yeah, well, a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And in that same time frame as well, so 26 to 29 seconds. So not too much dripping. And it gives you an extraction yield of like 18-19%.
What's the colour like? Is it rich or is it like a light?
It's a bit lighter.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the same challenge that we have. Like the amount of QC we have in our roasting is out of control. Like we have to do like quality control. So we capture every bit of information we can. Like we've got roasters who just all they do is think about that shit, and just every day they're like, trying to do the absolute best thing that they possibly can. But then at the end of the day, like it's still the same reality that we live in, that every coffee has a slightly different extraction yield or strength that suits it. And really, like, everything needs to be handcrafted to really get the best true result out of any coffee. A recipe is, and it's just a starting point. That's why I'm not afraid to give you numbers and just go, hey, do this, because I know it's going to taste good. But it could probably be a lot better if you have to.
Yeah.
And that's what we try.
Yeah, I reckon that's what we try, and then we say, no, we actually like it like this, and that's alright to do that.
Totally cool. Yeah. And like, man, one of the classes we run, the advanced skills class, that's the subject of the class. It's like, let's all start with the same recipe. We use 4 different coffees, and then you couple them next to each other, and you're like, this one is undeveloped, this one's overdeveloped, this one's spot on, and we've got the numbers there. And then we teach people to make a grind adjustment to change the taste balance. They want more body, we go finer. They want, just come in and do that class. Skip the rest. And that's fun.
Yeah, cool. When's that on?